Chapter 306. The Delu beast's attack was very sudden, to the point that Dake didn't have time to react. No, it wasn't just Dake. The magic guide fairies in the dormitory didn't have time to react. Originally, everyone was pretending to be asleep. Why did you suddenly jump out? Me. Fairy Ivan, who was also lying on the big bed, was the first to react. The ribbon antennae on its left ear and neck instantly spread out, pushing up the blanket. Little Ivan, who was also curled up into a ball, couldn't help but stand up. The magic guide fairies on the small bed forgot to hide and pushed the blanket higher than the other. But after Dake's face was grabbed by the Delu beast, it only leaned back and stabilized its body. The Delu beast's strength wasn't as great as imagined. Its body was also very soft and light. URL https://m Vipkanchu. VIP Dake stretched out his hand to support its underarm and pulled it away from his face. He discovered that its condition was somewhat abnormal. The Delu beast was the incarnation of pride. In theory, it was very difficult for it to do such a thing. If it was Fairy Ivan, then it wouldn't be strange at all. But the Delu beast did it. That meant that it should be in a state of confusion right now. Dake carefully observed it and quickly discovered that its eyes were drifting. Its cheeks were red, its nose was slightly wet, and there was a trace of chocolate near the corner of its mouth. The Delu beast, who was supported by its underarm, meowed and waved its 4 soft limbs. It actually looked a bit cute and naive. Dake sat it on its knees and then stretched out his hand to wipe off the trace of chocolate near the corner of its mouth. He put it in front of his nose and sniffed it. He stretched out his tongue and licked it. Immediately, there was a trace of alcohol smell. Dake suddenly understood. The liqueur chocolate that he had taken a bite out of was actually eaten by the Delu beast. But could a magic guide fairy get drunk? Moreover, although the alcohol content of the liqueur chocolate was very high, it was only a little. How could it make a 4-star magic guide fairy drunk like this? Dake couldn't help but feel puzzled. Could it be that the Delu beast was the type that could get drunk with just a little bit of alcohol? That was possible. People's physiques couldn't be lumped together. There were people who wouldn't get drunk after 1,000 cups, and of course, there were also people who would get drunk after just 1 sip of wine. Perhaps the Delu beast was the latter. However, the drunk Delu beast was surprisingly cute. Dake was used to the arrogant expression of the deluded beast, so this deluded beast that had become naive after getting drunk gave Dake a sense of novelty. He curiously pinched the Delu beast's face and found that not only did it not resist, it even rubbed its face against his fingers. Woo hot suit, Dake couldn't help but make a sound. So obedient. The drunk Delu beast was like the incarnation of pride, completely transforming into the incarnation of bliss. Its 2 cat eyes were filled with drunkenness. If I bring it to the bed now, does it count as picking up a corpse? It was a strange coincidence. This thought suddenly flashed through Dake's mind. Then, he took out the piece of paper that he had been holding in his hand but hadn't had the time to read it. A cat's life with you is so beautiful. A cat's life with you is so lucky. Dake's heart was moved. He flipped the Delu beast over and hugged it in his arms. He gently rubbed its chin and belly. The Delu beast was like a catgrass, affectionately calling out. When the magic guide fairies saw this, they suddenly didn't have the heart to fight. One by one, they crouched down again, squinting as they watched this harmonious scene between humans and pets. Only Fairy Evie was still unwilling to give up and waved her ribbon. Suddenly, she had an idea. She remembered the little movements the Delu beast had made when it was setting up the gift. She suddenly had an idea. So the key point is the chocolate Dake took a bite of. If the stinky cat can do it, then I, Fairy Evie, can do it too. Thus, she lay down again like a cat that had entered a hunting state. She squinted at Dake, who was stroking the cat. Originally, the cat being stroked should be her. The other magic guide fairies' thoughts weren't as strong as Fairy Evie's, but they were still somewhat envious. They all looked on, wishing that this was some kind of service that they could wait in line for. As the saying goes, don't worry about scarcity, but worry about uneven distribution. If Dake didn't spread the rain and dew evenly, it would be very difficult to escape unscathed. Fortunately, today was Wednesday, and he had to prepare for class in a while. No matter how much the magic guide fairies pestered him, they couldn't stop him from going to class. Dake and the Delu beast cuddled for a while, then carefully put the slip of paper into the notebook. At this point, there were already 10 slips of paper or cards in the notebook. The display of these magic guide fairies when they first learned how to write could be said to have vividly displayed their respective writing skills. When he looked back at it in the future, he hoped that they would all make great progress. Dake closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. This time, while hugging the Delu beast, he reached out to grab Anna's Valentine's Day gift. This was the first gift he received this morning, but he put it last. I wonder what kind of chocolate Anna made. It should be a bear, right? Thinking about the works of the magic guide fairies, Dake felt that Anna was very likely to make a chocolate bear. In this kind of situation, humans generally wouldn't use themselves as a blueprint to make chocolate, but they would often choose a symbol. For Anna, it was naturally a bear. Dake carried Anna's big box over. His hands went around the Delu beast, and he placed the gift box on his knees and opened it. As the gift box was opened, a corner of the chocolate inside was revealed. As expected, it was a round bear ear. When the full appearance was revealed, Dake's gaze gathered on the button-like eyes of the chocolate bear. His heart thumped, and he had a great sense of approval towards Anna's design. But such a meticulous design, it shouldn't be something that Anna could come up with alone. Dake couldn't help but think of Luosi. At first, because he saw Luosi sitting alone and wanted to drive Anna away, he pointed out a path for her. He didn't expect that the two of them would be so compatible. Or maybe Luosi's personality was really too good, and he could get along with anyone. Without Luosi's help, Anna's school life might not be as happy as it was today. The communication between people, the fate between people. Just like the fate between him and the magic guide fairies. It wasn't easy to come by. He had to cherish it. Anna's chocolate bear was really too exquisite, and it was impossible to eat it. Even if Dake wanted to taste it, he couldn't bear to. But he hesitated for a long time, and the Delu beast in his arms suddenly stretched its head forward, and then bit off one of the bear's ears. Good. At that moment, the magic guide fairies who were secretly watching couldn't help but praise it in their hearts. Everyone was pecking at each other, and suddenly a fairy bear popped out, and it was an outsider's. Of course they couldn't help but bite it off. There was a slight commotion in the dormitory. Dake looked at the Delu beast chewing the bear's ears with a drunken face, and he didn't know how to reprimand it. He was stunned for a moment, and then he subconsciously reached out and pulled off the other bear's ear, and then tasted it. Should he say that it was really Anna's style? The taste of this chocolate bear was the opposite of the chocolate that the Delu beast dominated. It was mainly sweet, mixed with a trace of the unique bitterness of chocolate. Too much sweetness could easily make people sick. The reason why people couldn't get tired of eating chocolate was because of the trace of bitterness in it. That was it. All the gifts received this morning had been opened. But there weren't many who had really tasted it. It was obvious that the magic guide fairies hoped that Dake could eat all the chocolate in front of them. So the idea of keeping it as a collection was directly rejected. It was just that there were too many chocolates on the table, and they definitely wouldn't be able to finish it in a short time. Dake rearranged the gift boxes, and decided to start with the love chocolate of the polymorph beast. Today, the little devil beast obviously didn't have time to get breakfast. After Dake ate half of the love chocolate, he carried the Delu beast, whose eyes were closed, to a small bed, covered it with a blanket, and then told the magic guide fairies to take good care of it. He quickly prepared his textbooks, carried his backpack, and went to the cafeteria to eat breakfast. Chocolate couldn't be eaten. Before leaving, he gave each of the magic guide fairies a hug, to thank them for the chocolates. But in fact, their existence was the best gift that this world had given him. Ever since the little devil beast took care of it, Dake rarely came to the cafeteria in the morning. Coming again today, he suddenly felt a sense of novelty. Because the first class started at 8 o'clock sharp. So the students would often come to the cafeteria between 7 o'clock and 7:30. Those who came early would be more leisurely, and those who came late would be in a hurry. The castle was too big, and it took a lot of time to travel. Valentine's Day wasn't a very formal holiday. The cafeteria didn't have any decorations because of it. However, the atmosphere of the students flirting with each other was abnormally obvious, and the smell of spring almost overflowed. Couples were lovey-dovey. The bachelors looked left and right. Dake ordered a small rib, an egg, a piece of bacon, and a bowl of corn soup, preparing to change the taste this morning. He carried the plate to an empty seat, and observed the life from a detached perspective. Suddenly, his line of sight flashed, and someone blocked in front of him. Although the person lowered his head, Dake was still able to recognize him at a glance. He was indeed a first-year student of the Night Academy. In the cafeteria, he gave out Valentine's Day chocolates in front of everyone. How much courage did he have? Dake held the plate with one hand, and reached out to take the chocolates that should be from a shop. The girl with a scarf wrapped around her cheeks ran away as fast as she could. Dake paused for a moment, maintained his elegant posture, and continued to move forward. Even if he was actually a conservative boy who leaned toward the ancient and traditional way of thinking, at this time, he had to show the bearing of a sea king. This might be the hypocrisy of a noble. Dake sighed slightly in his heart. Then, he put down the plate and began to eat his breakfast meticulously. But many people around him still had their eyes on him. That was why he didn't like to eat breakfast alone in the cafeteria. Because it was too eye-catching. Some people were born to emit light. But some people's light would gradually dim. Some people would only shine brighter. Dake didn't open the chocolate gift box in the cafeteria, but put it in his bag for the time being. Not long after him, a boy suddenly came in with a bouquet of roses, knelt on one knee, and blocked the path of a senior, and then reached out to hand the roses and chocolates. Dake watched with interest. He imagined that others might look at him with the same attitude. Sure enough, a spectator shouldn't be reduced to a spectator. Pa! A crisp sound exploded in the cafeteria. Everyone's eyes instantly focused on it. Without any hesitation, the senior female student slapped the boy's chocolate box and sent it flying away. How many times have I told you, stop bothering me? The girl yelled impatiently, then picked up the plate and left. Only the boy silently picked up the chocolates and walked out of the cafeteria. This was probably the set song of Valentine's Day. It was said that some boys had been looking forward to this moment and were amused by it. But they were the same kind of people, so why bother? The cafeteria was filled with unkind laughter. This was the reality between boys and girls. It was also Valentine's Day. When a girl gave a boy a gift, the boy was generally embarrassed to refuse it on the spot. When a boy gave a girl a gift, the girl would generally refuse it cleanly. When a boy received a lot of chocolates, it was something to show off. When a girl received a lot of chocolates, most of them would be troubled. After all, this world was still a patriarchal society. It had aristocratic polygamy. Even if the status of women was constantly rising, it still needed a process. Halfway through Dake's meal, Anna and Luo C found him in the crowd, then happily sat across from him and talked about what they had seen and heard on the road. What about a senior who confessed to a senior who ended up being kicked? What about a junior who confessed to a senior who ended up agreeing on the spot, then the junior who went back on her word? In short, there were all kinds of things. Dake cut the steak into thin pieces and inserted a fork into it. As the juice flowed out, a meaty aroma assailed his nose. He didn't participate in the conversation between Anna and Luo C, because he always felt that there was a hidden hint. They kept mentioning chocolate, so they probably wanted to hear his evaluation of the chocolate bear, right? But it was precisely because he understood. So Dake deliberately didn't say anything. Snowflakes were still floating outside the castle, but the momentum of the snow was gradually decreasing. By about noon, it might have stopped. There were basically no classes on Wednesday afternoon, so it was a good time to enjoy the snow and play with it. When Dake, Anna, and Luo C came to the potion classroom together, many of the first-year students were discussing the accuracy of Professor Midya's prophecy. It was like there was a layer of fog between the prophets and ordinary people. It was obviously very thin, but it couldn't be lifted. It was precisely because of this that the right amount of mystery attracted people to flock to it. Just one prophecy about the weather had raised Professor Midya's status in the hearts of the students. Therefore, they had extra expectations for tonight's astronomy class. Last week, Professor Midya had already announced today's topic in advance. It was the love divination that the students of this age group were most concerned about. It was a topic that perfectly matched the timing of Valentine's Day. Many people were already prepared to summon the courage to send the chocolate during the day, but the other party's response would only be revealed on the same day of the next month, which made it difficult to wait. Of course, under normal circumstances, if both parties were in love with each other, there would generally be a response before the White and White Festival. If the response was delayed until the White and White Festival, most of the time, it would be a forgotten rejection. Although it was cruel, it wasn't 100%, so there was still hope. Perhaps the one who sent the chocolate would also wake up in the next month and understand that they didn't like the other party that much. In this world, Valentine's Day actually promoted careful thinking, not impulse. As usual, Dake went to the last row by the window. The glass of the window was already covered with snow, and it was a vast expanse of white. A chill penetrated through, and it was cold. But when he took off his bag from his shoulder and was about to put it on the table, he suddenly noticed that there was something stuffed inside. It was chocolate. 2 of them were store-bought, and the other one seemed to be handmade. Since I left the house, there have been 4 more. Dake took a deep breath and temporarily put the 3 boxes of chocolate in his bag. He didn't want to open them in the classroom. Dake. Anna suddenly turned her head and said excitedly. Dake looked up in confusion. Yes? Diana scoffed and fished out a box of chocolates from below. She showed it off to him a couple of times. It was as if she was saying, "Look, I'm also very popular." No matter if it was a man or a woman, they needed to show their value to attract the opposite sex. Luosi also took out 2 boxes of chocolate from the drawer and said awkwardly, "What should I do?" She was actually still thinking about how to give away her little rabbit chocolate, and she didn't expect to receive chocolate from someone else. But unlike Anna's carefree attitude, she only felt troubled. "Leave the chocolate on the table when you leave." Dake glanced at her and gave her an idea. Luosi was still too thin-skinned. When she became an old fox in the future, she probably wouldn't have this kind of trouble. After all, receiving gifts on Valentine's Day and not returning gifts on White and White Festival was something that popular men and women had to endure every year. After a while, she would get used to it. Okay. Luosi nodded slightly, and her cheeks were slightly red. She couldn't even count the number of times she had blushed this morning. Anna slapped the chocolate in her hand on the table. "Then I'll leave it here later." Neither of them was going to open the chocolate. No matter who sent it, they wouldn't care if they didn't know. But what about other people? What if there were some mushy words written inside? Dake suddenly realized that it wasn't a wise move to leave the chocolate on the table. So Valentine's Day was really annoying. He quickly said, "No, who knows what's written inside? If someone picks it up and reads it, it'll be awkward." Huh? Anna was a little confused. "Then what should we do?" Dake smiled. "How about we eat it?" He heard that Senior Panduola would receive a lot of gifts from unknown people on Valentine's Day every year, but she never returned the gifts on White and White Festival. Wasn't it the same? Eat it? Anna swallowed subconsciously, and her eyes lit up slightly. When it came to eating, she had a lot of energy. Luosi pushed the chocolate to her. "Eat it for me too." Anna pouted. "I won't just eat anything, it has to taste good." Potions class. Professor Thompson entered the classroom with a smile on his face. He waved at the students below the stage like never before, and said loudly, "Students, how's the effect of the honey whisper potion?" Most of the students were confused, a small number of them were pale, and a few of them were suspicious. Professor Thompson walked up to the podium and knocked on the table. When all the students' attention was focused on him, he scratched his head and said apologetically, "Before class starts, I have to apologize. There's a small problem with the way to make the honey whisper potion that we talked about last time. The potion will stink. Hiss, but at least it won't explode. I don't think anyone will make this potion, right? So it's still not too late?" He laughed to himself, then turned to the blackboard and wrote as he said, "Today, we're going to talk about using a list of ingredients to deduce the medicinal properties of a potion. Now, please turn to page XX of the textbook." Anyway, he looked fine. Most of the students also looked fine. A small number of students quickly pretended to be fine after noticing the abnormality. Only a few students could not help but reach for their backpacks. These people, after making the potion, don't they experiment with the effects? Dake twirled his pen and glanced at the few boys and girls who looked uneasy. He guessed that they probably made the potion in a hurry and wanted to use it. Or maybe they only gathered the materials to make one bottle. Now that I think about it, Professor Thompson is really sinful. Haha. Although the beginning of this potions class was a little dramatic, the content was very important. Dake temporarily put aside the Valentine's Day and the chocolate, and began to listen to the class attentively. The explanation of theoretical knowledge was sometimes relatively boring, but it was necessary. If it was in the past, he would most likely be drowsy listening to it. Now, his self-control had improved by quite a bit. 1.5 hours later, the potions class ended. Professor Thompson did not mention the honey whisper potion again. The students packed up their textbooks amidst the laughter and went to the summoning class one after another. Anna walked on the road and could not help but open the chocolate that someone gave her. Inside it was a peach-shaped card with colored edges. Anna took out the card, and Luo C went over to take a look. There were small words written on the card, "Dear Anna, I've been watching you all this time. From the time you were assigned to the Aristocrat Academy during the Academy allocation ceremony, bravely advancing in the duel class, striving to be the best in the Halloween event, showing yourself in the club's recruitment competition, shining in the newcomers competition. I've been watching you all this time. You are the white moonlight in my heart, the treasure in my palm. I don't ask for your favor, I just want to fulfill a small wish. Excuse me, can I feed you?" Anna, Luo C, it's a girl. Anna could not help but pout, and then she stuffed the chocolate into her mouth and bit it in half. Crunch. Dake silently quickened his pace, indicating that he did not hear anything. Summoning class. After Professor Shi Erfu collected the huge amount of homework from the previous class, he began to explain the content of the homework. Sometimes he would set a rule to use homework paper to complete the homework, and many times he would not give it out after collecting it. Some students suspected that he did not mock the homework at all. However, because Professor Shi Erfu clearly stated that the homework would be counted into the final grade, no one dared to take the risk to verify. In short, this class was a very fulfilling one. After the summoning class ended, the students finally welcomed an entire afternoon of rest. Some of the students had already started to plan for Valentine's Day. After lunch, Dake returned to the dorm. He was a bit worried about the condition of the Dilu beast. But thinking about it carefully, it only ate a liqueur chocolate, so it shouldn't be drunk for too long, right? Therefore, he was quite relaxed. Since today was a rare snowy day, he wanted to take the magic guide elves outside to play in the afternoon. With Paradise, it would only take a little bit of effort to summon them. However, he did not tell them about this surprise yet. On the way back to the tower, he found that there were more and more people outside, and the outside of the castle was gradually filled with laughter. Anna and Luo C walked beside him, pretending to casually ask him to play in the snow in the afternoon. He then revealed a bit of his plan. Anna immediately said, "Then I'll bring the red panda too. No, it's so cold outside, I have to give it a warm body." She became excited as she said this. Changing clothes for dolls seemed to be a common hobby of girls. Anna obviously did not care about her own clothes, but she always liked to change clothes for her familiar. Luo C looked gratifyingly at Anna, who successfully got on the car, and thought that it was time for her to bring her familiar out for some fresh air. Although she always felt that her familiar was too clumsy compared to Dake's, a clumsy child still needed to be loved. "Then let's do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon." Dake arranged a time, and then separated from the two in the common room. As expected of Valentine's Day, even the number of couples in the common lounge had increased by a lot. Dake sighed and went up the stairs. Stopping in front of his own dormitory, Dake took out the key to open the door. With a gotcha sound, the dormitory door was successfully opened, and a mysterious world slowly unfolded in front of his eyes. After taking a look inside, the smile on Dake's face disappeared. He silently entered the hallway, closed the door behind him, and put on his slippers in one go. Then he walked into the room, and with a glance, he saw all the magic guide elves. At the top of the cat tree sat the lofty Dilu beast as usual. It was obviously completely awake, and at the moment, it was reading a picture book, with a small dictionary and some snacks on the side. Dake prepared a lot of snacks for the magic guide elves, so that they could take them at any time. When Dake entered the door, the Dilu beast slightly raised its head to look at him, and then continued to immerse itself in reading. Up until this point, everything was normal. But a little below the Dilu beast, on the cat tree, there was a fur ball with its belly facing up, for paws spread out, lying there softly, and its cheeks were flushed. And a little bit below, the little demon beast was hanging on the edge, as if it could fall down at any time. Not far away, the Chochio sea lion was dizzily soaking in a small air cushion pool, spitting out bubbles from time to time. Big Milk Can was lying on the ground, imitating the movements of a cow grazing. Through the balcony window, one could see the strict Hawkman wrestling, as usual, striking a wooden dummy. The polymorphic monster was carrying the trash slime, and the trash slime had the magic card on its head, and it was leaning against the window, looking at the snow outside. But the meow meow card was facing inward. Meow hot suit. A pink figure suddenly flew over from the side. Dake stepped to the side, but then stopped, and raised his hand. Immortal EV successfully clung onto his body, rubbing his cheek against his cheek. That soft touch was something that one could never get tired of. But Dake didn't continue to indulge in the warmth, and instead stretched out his hand to push it away, saying expressionlessly, "All right, stop pretending, you're not drunk." Meow. Fairy Evie's expression suddenly froze. Could it be that its plan to pass off as a fake was exposed just like that? In a panic, it closed its eyes, and let its strength disappear, pretending that it was so drunk that it couldn't hear anything. But Dake pulled its eyelids, and forced its eyes open. "Tell me what's going on?" He pointed at the drunken magic guide elves in the bedroom, and said sternly. Fairy Evie's heart suddenly went, "Guh," and it called out, "Meow mama," a few times, trying to fool him. But at this time, the Dilu beast on the cat tree said slowly, "It fed those elves chocolate with wine." Fairy Evie's hair stood on end, and it suddenly turned its head. "Meow. You thieving cat." The Dilu beast had already buried its head back into its book. Dake's face darkened, and he immediately guessed a few things. But he still didn't know enough. In fact, when Fairy Evie saw the Dilu beast secretly eating the liqueur chocolate that Dake had bitten, it wanted to imitate it, but it was worried that it would be drunk and do something bad that would make Dake feel disgusted. So after it carefully thought about it, it thought of a brilliant plan. That was to lure a few magic guide elves to eat the liqueur chocolate. Once they were drunk, it could blend in and pretend to be drunk. This way, it could enjoy the stickers while sober. Moreover, it could prevent accidents from happening when it was drunk. Thinking about it carefully, this plan was really brilliant. If it wasn't for the fact that it had never drunk before, and couldn't pretend to be drunk at all, it really would have succeeded. So no matter what it did, it had to be proficient. Of course, it was impossible for Fairy EV to reveal its plan completely. Now that the plan had been exposed, it could only muddle through with its cuteness. Meow. It immediately lay down on the ground, opened its big innocent eyes, and exposed its belly to its owner. 4-in-1 8,000. If you don't vote, it'll rot in your hands, brother cutie. Chapter 307. Of course, Dake wouldn't let it get away with it. He squinted at Fairy Ivan and said in a low voice, "Get up." Me. Fairy Ivan twisted its waist. Dake snorted coldly. 1. Fairy Ivan. Me. Dake. 2. Fairy Ivan. Me. Its ears immediately perked up, and its ribbon antennae subconsciously tightened. Anyone with a brain would know that this couldn't be a reward, so it could only be a punishment. Fairy Ivan's little red flower was always unable to make ends meet. Every day, It worked hard to do homework, and it still had to pay for the entrance fee to the milk jar. Its savings were getting smaller and smaller, and it had long been shrouded in the aura of poverty. Every time a little red flower was deducted, it would strike at its heart and cause a heartache of despair. Remember the URL. M. Vipkanchu. VIP, but Dake's voice still sounded mercilessly. 3. Fairy Ivan was still struggling in its heart. Dake. 4. Fairy Ivan. Me. It suddenly stood up, its eyes filled with panic. Its two antennae cautiously reached out and wrapped around its master's wrist. It was begging for mercy, deduct 10. Dake snorted coldly. After putting down his bag, he turned around and said, "Follow me." Me. Wasn't it supposed to be 4? Why did it jump to 10? Fairy Ivan's heart was falling apart, and its expression was miserable and desperate. But in order to not be deducted negative, it could only lower its head and follow Dake out of dorm 201. As soon as they left the dorm, they were out of the range of paradise. Fairy Ivan could clearly feel that its body wasn't as nimble as before. But fortunately, the magic guide fairy had an innate grasp of basic strength, and it didn't take long for it to adapt. 10 minutes later, Fairy Ivan was brought to the kitchen of the Shang Malian cafeteria. Dake stood behind it with his arms crossed and a serious expression on his face. Fairy Ivan squatted on the ground, its two claws together, and bowed to the halfling chef with a pitiful appearance. The halfling chef looked at the lively magic elf with a kind expression. He couldn't help but think of the bat familiar that hadn't appeared this morning. She kindly said, "All right, I'll go make you a pot of special hangover soup." Dake kicked Evie's butt and urged, "Hurry up and thank Auntie." Me. Fairy Evie hurriedly nodded and bowed. The halfling chef smiled and went to prepare the ingredients. After she left, Dake leaned against the wall so as not to disturb the other halfling chefs. Fairy Ibu carefully moved over and clung to his leg, using his face to squeeze. Fairy Ibu, way. If you make a mistake, you must pay the price. Only by knowing pain can one be alerted. Dake's gaze was slightly cold. He did not pay attention to Fairy Ibu's warm words. The halfling chefs passing by all looked curiously at the woman and her pet, but most of them looked at Fairy Ibu with a tolerant gaze after learning the truth. Clearly, they were the perfect example of a loving mother leads to a wastrel son. Dake himself was also a failed product of excessive spoiling, so he was very vigilant about this. Just like the behavior of the little fiend beast after it evolved into the little fiend beast. Although it was pardonable, it still couldn't be ignored. Fairy Ibu's subjective mistake needed to be educated. Although the magic elves were all-powerful, their minds were still young and immature. As their master, Dake's behavior would have a huge impact on their mental growth. The little fiend beast and the Diru beast were the most obvious. The little fiend beast was originally a crafty demon that was good at scheming and lying. But now, it only occasionally spoke a few words and was as honest as a child. Oh, it was a child to begin with. And the Diru beast's arrogance and diligence were like Dake's bloodline. He only hoped that after this incident, Fairy Ibu would be able to learn her lesson. Next time, even if you want to do something, don't be so stupid. A quarter of an hour later, Dake obtained a pot of hangover soup from the halfling chef. This thing had been used on Professor Li, and the effect was pretty good. Moreover, the magic elves weren't too drunk, so it shouldn't take long for them to sober up. Dake brought Fairy Ibu back, and gradually discovered that more and more students were gathering outside the castle. The students were like swans gliding on the frozen lake, and there were people making snowmen and having snowball fights all around the lake. They were very happy. His mood gradually calmed down. In fact, he wasn't really angry, he was just putting on an act. After returning to the dormitory, Dake gave the task of feeding the hangover soup to Fairy Ibu. Then he sat in front of his desk, took out a book, and slowly started reading. This afternoon, he wanted to enjoy life as much as possible. About half an hour later, the magic elves woke up one by one. The main culprit, Fairy Ibu, was forced into a corner by them, and the shadow of revenge gradually invaded. Seeing that Fairy Ibu was about to perform Fairy Ibu, No Misery, Dake couldn't help but laugh and say, "All right, everyone get ready." At around 2 o'clock, I'll take you out to see the snow." When these words came out, the magic elves instantly stopped, and one by one, they pricked up their ears and looked at him, urgently wanting to confirm if they had misheard. Dake slowly repeated, "You can bring some snacks, milk, and treat it as a last winter outing. Although it's actually spring now. But when you return, remember to collect the trash. We are quality tourists, do you understand?" Moo moo. Foo woo. Wow. The magic elves surrounding Fairy Ibu immediately scattered, and one by one, they excitedly looked for their own small bags, and then desperately stuffed snacks into them. Of course, there were also some that carried a small drawing board-like kettle. That was something Dake had prepared for it after seeing that it had a talent for drawing. As for the Dilu beast, its cat ears twitched, and it began to choose a picture book suitable for reading in the snow. It gradually had a bit of an artistic style. The little devil was the first to take out its scarf and hat, and put them on before it even left the house. Although the other magic elves didn't have hats, they all followed suit and wrapped their scarves around themselves. It was just that the trash slime's body was too small, and its scarf had been turned into a swaddling cloth by the polymorph, and then it was placed inside. Of course, the milkkin didn't forget to fill up its sure-kill skill, drinking milk. With Dake watching from the outside, it wanted to try and wander around even further. The sea lion, Chochio, who was the first to prepare, had already begun to dance, and held up a huge bubble. In short, the time passed by quickly after all this. Dake stuffed his notebook, books, teacups, and other things into his bag, and then took out Paradise, and put it into his card bag. He didn't put all the magic elves back into the card, and instead brought them out in a grandiose manner. Anyway, many people in the academy already knew that the little cow that always brought the little cuties around was a first-year student of the Aristocrat Academy, Dake Diming's Magic Elven. As for the consumption of magic power, he could easily endure the journey of reopening Paradise. No matter if it was a winter outing or a spring outing, swimming was the key. Swimming from the starting point all the way to the destination was also a kind of experience. Dake clearly remembered that when he was in elementary school, he carried his bag, lined up, and walked all the way to the park and other places under the guidance of the teachers. The happiness at that time was hard to find even in the amusement park when he grew up. Anna and Luo C, who appeared on time at the entrance of room 201, probably didn't expect that their group would be so large. The two little girls had changed into beautiful winter clothes, scarves, gloves, hats, and everything else. Anna looked eager to give it a try, and her mind was probably already fantasizing about building the Shangmolian's largest snowman. However, when she saw the magic elves timidly walking out of Dake's dormitory, the previously shelved idea of having a snowball fight once again overshadowed the idea of building a snowman. Originally, she thought that no one would have a snowball fight with her, but now she didn't have to worry at all. Dake let her and the magic elves mingle together like a kindergarten class leader, and walked to the front, becoming the locomotive of the group. He walked side by side with Luo C. This large group of people and pets walked down the stairs in a grandiose manner, and arrived at the common room of the Aristocrat Academy. The magic elves and Anna's chatter poured into the common room. In the common room, the boys and girls who were hugging the fireplace for warmth were firmly attracted to this scene in an instant. This unprecedentedly grand scene made them almost forget what they were doing. Even the boys and girls who were kissing each other froze. It wasn't that no one liked to walk around with magic elves, but to bring a large group of them like this. Was it because there was too much magic or something? Moreover, the expressions and movements of this group of magic elves were like living creatures no matter how one looked at them. Each and every one of them looked like they grew up eating cuteness. In the past, there was a profession called beast tamer, who fought by taming monsters. When they went out, they would often travel in groups like this. However, in this era, beast tamers who were far behind the times were almost extinct, and could only be seen in circuses. At this moment, Dake had a bit of the demeanor of a beast tamer. It wasn't until Anna and the magic elves' train left the common room that the students of the Aristocrat Academy suddenly came back to their senses. Then, the discussion erupted like a volcano. A few girls whispered a few words to each other, and couldn't help but follow. They didn't want to rush up and carry one away, but just looking at the group of little guys from afar made them feel satisfied. Under such circumstances, a student who usually stayed in the common room suddenly stood up and quietly walked upstairs. Aristocrat Academy Tower, Room 501. The president of the Aristocrat History Research Society, Angus Jeffrey, was drinking afternoon tea surrounded by members of the society. Angus Jeffrey was a fourth-year student, and he became the president of the Aristocrat Academy Research Society in the second half of his third year. It had almost been a year since then. Ever since the last newcomers competition, the second-year top student he appointed, Elsie Kevin, not only lost to Dake Dimming in the duel, but also became the super background of Dake's sudden appearance. He had been quiet for a while. The Aristocrat History Research Society wasn't a monolith. Once he made a big mistake in his decision-making and damaged the interests of the society, or caused a big loss to the reputation of the society, even if he was the president, there was a possibility that he would be ostracized. In fact, his decision to go against Dake during the newcomers competition was already a failure, and it caused a considerable loss to the reputation of the society. Some time ago, when he confronted other societies, he was even ridiculed on the spot without being able to refute. Because of this, he needed to do something to make up for this loss. Therefore, when someone told him that Dake was traveling with a large number of magic elves, he knew that his opportunity had come. The release of magic elves consumed a large amount of magic power, and this was obviously common sense among common sense. Although Dake Dimming's magic power seemed to be very strong, humans had their limits. No matter how strong he was, he couldn't use up his magic power without restraint. As long as he seized the opportunity when his magic power was exhausted, he could make a small move and destroy his prestige. Once Dake Dimming made a fool of himself in front of everyone, Angus Jeffrey would be able to make a comeback. And this small move had to be taken care of. It had to be within the bounds of the rules. Shang-Malian Academy explicitly prohibited fighting, but all disputes were encouraged to be settled in the form of duels. In addition, it was Valentine's Day, which was prone to disputes, so the right time and place were on his side. In the end, there was only one person left. But this person problem was a big problem. Jeffrey sipped his tea and couldn't help but look at the club members around him. He said, "How about it? Do any of you recommend?" The club members couldn't help but lower their heads when he asked this question. Recommend? Who should they recommend? Even Elsie Kevin wasn't a match for him, so who else could they recommend? Should they look for the second-year Mary to play Mortal Kombat? If they really went, who knew who would be the one getting beaten up? But if they excluded the second year, were they supposed to look for the third year, fourth year, or even fifth year? Hey! The last time they found a second year to deal with Dake Dimming, it was already embarrassing enough, okay? He was a first-year student who had only been in school for half a year. I think so. Jeffrey's confidant, Mike Owen, brushed the curly hair on his forehead and said, Dake Dimming isn't an ordinary person after all, and he publicly defeated Kevin in the newcomers competition. So, it's not embarrassing for us to find a third year. Jeffrey turned his gaze to him and asked, So, Owen, you have someone to choose? Owen coughed dryly and glanced to the side. No. Then what was there to say? Jeffrey cursed in his heart and turned to look at the snowy scenery outside the window. Owen added, It's like this. Everyone is a student of the noble house and has their own pride. It's fine if the second year is assigned to fight the first year. But if it's a third-year student, it's very difficult for anyone to agree. So, actually, we don't have to keep harping on him. Even if he establishes his own club in the future, he can't get rid of the fact that he's from the noble house. His club won't go against the noble house. We can actually be on the same side. Stop. Jeffrey was clearly annoyed by his long speech and slammed the table to stop him on the spot. Mike Owen's sudden words were obviously a denial of his previous decision, which made him very unhappy. Suddenly, he rolled his eyes and sneered at Owen. I have someone to choose. Dake didn't expect that a good student like him, who had both good morals and good morals, would actually be targeted. After he led the large group out of the noble house's tower, he didn't immediately walk out of the castle. Instead, he took the nearest stairs and went up to the 5th floor of the castle. This height was almost enough for everyone to enjoy the scenery. The magic guide fairies climbed up the hole in the castle wall one by one and looked down at the pure white land covered in silver. Looking down from above and looking down on the ground, the snowy scenery was completely different. It wasn't easy to have such an opportunity. Dake hoped that the magic guide fairies could experience more perspectives. He stood at the side and looked gently at the excited magic guide fairies, his heart gradually satisfied. Anna pulled Luo C and blended in perfectly with the magic guide fairies. There was no difference at all. Their familiars chased after their heels. Although they looked quite agile, Dake, who had seen his own magic guide fairies, could easily see that their movements were stiff. Let's find a chance to give them a little surprise. Dake smiled. When the magic guide fairies had enough fun, Dake led them down the stairs from the other side of the castle. His current magic power was roughly equal to that of an adult magus, but the quality and recovery rate of his magic power were far superior. Therefore, the amount of magic power he could use per unit of time was higher than that of an adult magus. The magic power consumed by the few magic guide fairies could be replenished by the self-recovery of their magic power. Thus, until now, it was still considered easy. But if this continued for a little longer, there might be a situation where his magic power ran out. Therefore, he was going to find a suitable place to open Paradise. While Dake was planning for the afternoon snow viewing activity, most of the first-year students were worrying about Valentine's Day. Knights Academy Tower, first-year dormitory. White Gouda and Luo Boat Broheim were hiding in the dormitory and playing magic chess. Since Luo Boat had a new chess piece, White, who was already no match for him, was even less of an opponent. The two almost couldn't play properly. After falling into a disadvantageous position again, White hesitated. Luo Boat, why do you think Dake purposely showed off that vampire chess piece? Luo Boat shook his head, indicating that he didn't know either. White continued to speculate. The seal on the secret passage hasn't been opened yet. Could it be that the professors haven't been able to find that vampire? Could it be that Dake showed off the vampire chess piece to bait him? But will it work? Luo Boat still shook his head. I don't know. White, if Dake was really doing this under the professor's instructions, then could it be that Vlad has actually escaped the secret passage and is hiding among us? Otherwise, there's no way to explain his behavior. Luo Boat sighed. White, don't overthink it. It's too dangerous. Even if it's as you guessed, it's not something we can interfere with. That's not necessarily true. White shook the chess piece and whispered, with the senior's help, my holy sword curse is almost complete. Luo Boat froze for a second, then congratulated him. That's good news. A hero with a holy sword is a true hero. A hero with a holy sword is a true hero. Do you still remember Professor Mitya's prophecy? Of course, White said. History is always the same, and reincarnation never stops. I'll inherit my father's will and become a holy sword user worthy of being a hero's son. Luo Boat smiled. So, Mr. Sword Saint, are you ready to deliver the chocolate? White's expression froze. He sighed. I'll have to use the store's chocolate. This meant that he had tried to make handmade chocolate, but it ended in failure. Luo Boat comforted him. It's all the same. Maybe the store's chocolate is better. White. Maybe. As he sighed, his castle was completely captured by Luo Boat's chess pieces. But his thoughts had drifted away. Luo Boat asked, how about it? Have you thought about how to deliver it? Do you want someone to deliver it for you? Do you want to quietly put it at the front desk, or do you want to deliver it yourself? White came back to his senses and said firmly, I'll deliver it myself. I'm a hero's son. Half an hour later, White and Luo Boat appeared at the entrance of the library. White was nervous as he approached the door. He hesitated for a while, and when he saw that no one was at the door, he gritted his teeth and walked into the library. Panduola was reading at the front desk. She had an appointment with Ms. Bella to change shifts at 3 in the afternoon. There was still half an hour before 3 o'clock. She had been receiving gifts since she started work at noon, and there was a small mountain under the counter. The boys who gave her chocolate probably realized that confessions were useless after experiencing the pain of the past few years. So they left after giving her the gifts. There were also some people from the fan club who sent large amounts of chocolate and flowers. It was like this every Valentine's Day. And there were more and more gifts every year. In short, as long as it wasn't a face-to-face confession, Panduola would accept them all. As for what she would do with them, of course she wouldn't eat them and show them off. Valentine's Day chocolate was a good secret material. Panduola looked up at the door. The two first-year students had been standing there for a few minutes. These people loitering in front of the library were troublesome for the librarian in charge of registration. But she had a question she wanted to ask, so she held it in. Finally, the black-haired boy walked into the library. But if one only looked at his expression, they would mistake him for a battlefield. Register. When he walked closer, Panduola pushed the registration form to him. White's expression froze, and he looked at the registration form for a long time. Then, he gritted his teeth and picked up the chocolate box hidden behind him. Then he said loudly, "Senior, please accept my chocolate." Panduola pointed at the table and said, "Put it there." White turned his head and put the chocolate in the small pile of boxes. He wanted to say something else, but Panduola asked, "Oh yeah, you and Dake Dimming are classmates, right? Do you know where he is now?" 3 in 6,000 words. Looking for votes. Chapter 308. White Gouda thought of many possibilities. He might be rejected or ignored, but the current situation was beyond his expectations. He never thought that Panduola would ask such a question after accepting his chocolate so calmly. Shouldn't a girl who always read be gentle, reserved, and considerate? Why would she ask another boy a question after he gave her Valentine's Day chocolate? Was this behavior without any EQ really something she would do? And why didn't she feel anything when she accepted the chocolate? Where was her shyness? Her worries? What kind of person is she? White felt a trace of disillusionment. 1 second to remember https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. It seemed that it was only at this moment that he suddenly realized that Pandora was not the image of his mother in his imagination. After a long while he lowered his head and said, "No, I didn't see Dake." Before he finished his sentence, he suddenly turned around and ran away without looking back. "You don't know?" Panduola looked at White's quickly disappearing figure and could not help but sigh softly. Then, she lowered her head and continued to read her book. To her, White was a stranger who had no interaction with her other than registering at the library. A complete stranger naturally did not have the need to care about what he thought. She did not see him as a bug only because she grew up with the help of people. Her sense of identity with humans slightly overpowered her natural instincts. As for the reason why she accepted the chocolate, it was because of a temporary need. And too many people had given her chocolate, so she gradually became numb. When she received the Valentine's Day chocolate for the first time, she was actually confused. But that was all in the past. Unfortunately, she did not manage to get information about Dake's whereabouts from the boy, so she had to find him herself. Could he be in the snow? After the handover, I'll go for a walk in the snow. If I can meet him, then it's fate. If I can't, then forget about it. When she thought about walking in a world of ice and snow, Panduola could not help but frown. She hated snow. Valentine's Day was like this. Some people were happy, while others were sad. Although the White Gouda was not rejected, it seemed to be more painful than being rejected. He realized that he had fallen out of love, completely out of love. Previously, he had always felt that it was enough to slowly get in touch with it. When he talked to the seniors in the Marine Biology Research Department, they all came to the same conclusion. Sincerity can move metal and stone. He would start from the first time he gave her a gift so that she would notice him. Then, he would give it away every year, hoping for a change. For a boy to chase a girl, the most important thing was to be thick-skinned. If he persisted for a long time, he would eventually receive a response. In short, the seniors of the Marine Biology Research Department helped him summarize all kinds of skills. He also told himself that he had to persevere. However, The truth was that the first time he gave her a gift, he had already broken her defense. Luo Boat was eavesdropping at the door and witnessed the whole process. As a boy who also had no experience in love, he could only pat his best friend's back and say a few words like, "It's okay," and "It'll pass." He thought White was just upset because she had been rejected. Luo Boat even thought that it might be a good thing to be rejected. White should also focus on his studies. They were only in their first year and should spend more effort on their studies. Only by laying a good foundation could they have a better future. Moreover, wasn't the magic chess good? Why don't we go and see the snow? This year is over, I don't know when we will encounter such heavy snow again. Okay. In the snow near the lake. Dake asked the magic elves to clear an open space and then began to expand paradise. Although he thought of expanding the entire paradise, he did not do so in the end. In the faint white light that reflected the snow, the range of paradise continued to expand, but only 2 round tables and a dozen stone benches appeared in the open space. Although Luo C and D Anna already knew that he had such a venue card, they still felt that it was magical when they saw it at this time. D Anna patted the stone table curiously, sat down on the stone bench, and then put the big and small bags on the table. The snacks she brought were no less than the magic elves. The magic elves glanced at her and followed her example, putting their small bags on another stone table, and then couldn't wait to take out the snacks and eat. The feeling of returning to the embrace of paradise made them feel excited. Woofufu, the sea lion, rubbed against Dake's calf and then pointed at the frozen lake. Dake touched its head and smiled. Go. Chochio Sea Lion immediately crawled towards the lake happily, and then glided on the surface of the lake. Although its posture was clumsy, it did not have to worry about falling because of its body structure. It was just that sometimes it could not stop when it slid. The students who were skating on the lake suddenly noticed that a small sea lion wearing a scarf had joined in and could not help but play with it. No one dislikes cute little animals. And in the snow by the lake, the milk jug used round shape and started rolling in the snow. The little demon beast flew in the air and chased after it. The Hawkman wrestling was trying out snow sprint. The polymorph was hurriedly protecting the trash slime that had almost been frozen into ice. The pitiful Meow Meow was thrown into swaddling clothes made of scarves and could only sullenly look at the clouds in the sky. Ibu. Little Ibu took the opportunity to walk to Dake's side and use its soft cheek to rub against his calf. Then with a bayou sound, it jumped onto his thigh and curled up into a ball, squinting its eyes to enjoy its master's warmth. Fairy Ibu secretly bared its teeth at this side. But it had just made a mistake, so it did not dare to act cute and could only reluctantly make a snowman. Dake sat under the stone and gently stroked little Ibu's fur, his eyes filled with warmth. Hoo-Hoo climbed on top of a stone and used its tentacles to hold a brush, trying to draw this warm scene with a brush. However, its level was actually based on the kindergarten class and the first grade of primary school. It used abstract techniques. The Dilu beast simply sat down on the stone next to Dake and spread the book on the stone table to read. But its gaze was still attracted by the magic elves rolling in the snow from time to time. Go play, Dake said gently. The Dilu beast's expression struggled for a moment, and finally solemnly closed the picture book and stuffed it into its bag. Then with a meow, it pounced towards the snowball. Cats all liked round things. This was their innate nature. Okay. Dake finally thought of Meow Meow. He waved at the polymorph. Hurry up. The polymorph carried the trash slime and moved over. Dake took the trash slime from its hands, then took out Meow Meow from the swaddling clothes and activated the usual summoning skill. Meow. Meow Meow, who finally saw the light of day, immediately meowed towards the sky. Its whole body of grievances was released. Then with all 4 limbs on the ground, it pounced towards the Dilu beast. The 2 cats rolled towards the snowball. Dake put the thermos bottle in the swaddling clothes and let the trash slime cling to it, then said to the polymorph, "Can you rest assured now?" Hurry up. The polymorph immediately shouted happily, then its body naturally changed from the slime shape to a Meow Meow, then it turned around and pounced towards the position of Meow Meow and the Dilu beast. The sight of the 3 cats rolling around in the snow attracted countless gazes. "That's great." Luo Si hugged its own familiar rabbit and couldn't help but reveal an envious expression. After stuffing its entire cheeks with snacks, Deanna climbed down the stone block and ran towards the 3 cats that had already started the snowball fight. The panda familiar that was tightly wrapped in small clothes was mercilessly tossed onto the table. For a moment, under the clear sky, on the snow, laughter and cheers. Endless. Dake squinted at this scene, and occasionally a trace of absent-mindedness flashed across his face. The overlapping of the memories of 2 lives sometimes made him confused. But today's scene was actually something that he had been dreaming of for a long time. But to maintain this dream, he also needed to put in an equivalent amount of effort. No one could destroy it. In the clouds, Lily Laplace lazily lay in the sky. Her wings didn't vibrate, but they still supported her to float. The pure white castle made her recall something. But as time passed, the memory was already blurred. A long time was a gift that fairies were born with, but occasionally it would also become a problem. Slowly, she turned over in the air, and her 2 hands and feet were softly hanging on her petite body. Her eyes were like a salted fish, glancing at the crowd in the snow. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she found her little sweetheart in the snow. "Hey!" She grinned and slowly flew down. But as she flew, she suddenly raised her hand. "Hiss! I have to prepare something." Thus, she tore a piece in the air and crumpled it into a ball in her palm. Then she activated the refining. A trace of light flashed. There was an almost transparent cube in her hand. "Add some more color. Add some more patterns. Add some packaging. It's done." Thus, a piece of fake chocolate was forcibly created by her. With the gift, Lily flapped her wings and slowly flew down. Panduola, who had finished her day's work early, asked the magic elf to send all the chocolates back to the dormitory, and walked into the snow. She didn't deliberately look for them, but just strolled in the snow. The cold wind made her a little uncomfortable, and she couldn't help but tighten her scarf. Her fluttering long hair was even more eye-catching against the snow. A faint aura of pressure was emitted from his body. The surrounding people unknowingly scattered to the side. At some point, Panduola had already arrived by the lake. She walked along the lake, and a snowball half the height of a person rolled all the way to her. She narrowed her eyes slightly, but didn't move aside. But the snowball suddenly stopped, and a bat-like familiar landed on the snowball, leaving a plum blossom-shaped footprint on it. Crash! The snow on the snowball suddenly scattered. A pink calf wearing a scarf unfolded its curled-up body and looked at the girl in front of it in a daze. Panduola couldn't help but think of her young winged dragon and the chinchilla grass in the dormitory. She bent down slightly and wanted to reach out and stroke the head of the calf. But the big milk can suddenly shrank its head and turned back. It turned a big corner and rolled back the way it came. The little demon beast chased after it and flew blindly, letting out wild laughter. It was as if it was chasing after a prey that was fleeing in panic. The cold wind blew, mixed with sporadic snowflakes. Panduola straightened her back and lifted a bunch of hair that hung in front of her. She continued to walk forward, following the rolling trajectory of the milk can. There weren't many magic elves with such intelligence in the Shang-Malian Academy. Moreover, she knew them. Not long after, the person she was looking for appeared in her field of vision. But she stopped at the edge. Many magic guiding fairies were playing in the snow. A lively girl mixed in with the magic elves. A blonde boy and girl sitting at the edge of the stone table chatting. The faint warmth around them. It was the atmosphere she had always envied. It was like a complete family. A private domain was carved out in this snowy land. There was a feeling that she couldn't get involved. However, she quickly smiled again. The cute junior brother took the initiative to wave at her. That was an invitation. So she took a step forward and stepped into that private territory. "Senior, aren't you on duty this afternoon?" Dake waited for Panduola to sit down before handing her a cup of hot tea and asking. Panduola took the teacup very naturally and held it in her palm, greedily absorbing the heat from it. She said, I came earlier today. Miss Bella asked me to come and see the snow. Of course, Miss Bella had good intentions. But in fact, she didn't have a good impression of snow. During the heavy snow, plants withered and animals hibernated. There was almost no food in the forest of exile. They could only starve. Dake vaguely remembered that she didn't like snow, so he didn't say much. He changed the topic and said, "Aren't you going to release your familiar?" Panduola smiled, took out her school card, and summoned her familiar, the fat young winged dragon. The young winged dragon, which had been blessed by the Great Sin card, pounced on Dake's face as soon as it came out. It was obviously very fond of his scent. Dake pulled it off his face a little lovingly, then placed it on the table, facing Panduola. Panduola reached out and touched the young winged dragon's chin, muttering, "Traitor." At this time, she turned to look at Luo Si beside Dake and asked, "This is?" Luo Si hurriedly said, "Hello, Senior. I'm Luo Si Flotty, a first-year student of the Noble House." Panduola nodded. Of course, she knew these two girls who were always by Dake's side, so she was just looking for a topic to talk about. Luo Si blinked her eyes and observed this senior that she saw almost every day. She couldn't help but ask, "Senior, they always say that you receive piles of chocolates and flowers every Valentine's Day. Is that true?" Panduola paused for a moment, then said, "Something like that." Luo Si, then, what if it's a gift from someone you don't know, or someone you don't like? Panduola, of course, I'll reject it. Luo Si, then what if the other party secretly put it under your desk? Panduola couldn't help but smile. You've received a gift, right? I was as troubled as you when I was in first year. If someone gives you a gift or a confession in front of you, just bravely reject it. Hesitating will only give the other party unrealistic fantasies. If they secretly put it in your drawer, just throw it in the trash. Luo Si couldn't help but cover her mouth. Is that okay? Panduola said without hesitation, "You have to know that if someone who doesn't have much contact with you suddenly says that he likes you one day, then one day, he will suddenly say the same thing to someone else. There's no need to interact with this kind of person." Luo Si said in realization, "I see." Panduola, why is Valentine's Day split into two parts? It's to remind people that they have to think carefully about their feelings. Because it's not something that can be fixed just because it's wrong. We girls are the ones who are at a disadvantage in this aspect, so we have to be more careful. Luo Si nodded vigorously. Affection +1. Dake couldn't help but sigh as he watched the two of them exchange their thoughts. Panduola was really quick and ruthless when it came to dealing with Valentine's Day gifts. For someone like him, there was no way he would throw a gift into the trash can. It was called gentlemanly behavior. But in the end, it was indecisiveness. It wasn't clean enough to cut it off. But if he really did that, it would probably cause a bad reputation. Girls could be clean in this aspect, but boys couldn't. While they were talking, the sound of wings flapping suddenly came from above the three of them. When they subconsciously looked up, Lily Professor suddenly broke free from the state of invisibility and flew to the opposite side of Dark with a "bye-oo" sound. The little fairy, who looked to be the same age as Dark, giggled as she threw the fake chocolate into the pile of snacks. Then, she pretended that nothing had happened and said, "What's wrong? Are you all playing here?" Dake didn't care much about the chocolate. He said, "It's the first snow of spring after winter. We have to experience it." Professor Lily looked around and observed the girls in this private area. Suddenly, he said, "Did they all give you Valentine's Day chocolates?" Dake was stunned when he heard this. He didn't expect Professor Lily to ask such a question. But in this situation, he just had to tell the truth. So he directly said, "We're just friends." But from the corner of his eye, he suddenly saw Luo Si silently take out a square gift box from her bag. Then, she copied Professor Lily and carefully put the gift box into the pile of snacks. So, Dake's voice came to an abrupt end. Professor Lily's eyes immediately glanced at Panduola. Panduola smiled calmly and took out a bar of chocolate from her sleeve. Then, she stuffed it into the pile of snacks. Finally, The two of them both glanced at Deanna, who was still rolling in the snow with the three cats. Dake said awkwardly, "Yes, yes," Deanna did. Squeak, squeak. Little Ibu seemed to feel threatened. Suddenly, it stretched out from its dumpling form and laid down on its owner's chest, emphasizing its possessiveness. Dake subconsciously reached out and hugged it. Professor Lely glanced at Little Ibu and suddenly said, "Dake, I want to build the biggest snowman in Shangmalian." "Are you Deanna?" Of course, this sentence could only be kept in the stomach. "Together?" Dake asked. Panduola put her hand to her mouth and blew on it. Then she said, "Sure." Luo Si nodded subtly. The four of them stood up and found a place to start building a snowman. Until now. Only then did Mike Owen appear nearby. He looked at the people around Dake Dimming with a blank face and couldn't help but rub his eyes. A third-year girl next to him couldn't help but frown and scold. "What's going on, Owen? Is this the first-year student you said is easy to bully? Dake Dimming? Look at who's next to him." Fourth-year Pan Duola Doragon, a fairy professor who has lived for more than 100 years. "If you can't even see this, I think you should go back to the furnace and be reborn." Cough. Owen coughed dryly. "Don't be like this, Maggie. I'm just following orders." Although Jeffrey was a little impulsive, he was not stupid. He actually wants to use this method to set the Aristocratic History Research Society up against Dake Dimming bit by bit. Many people in our society are fence-sitters. We have to give them some encouragement. "Maggie, I'm saying you're stupid." Owen. After a while. Owen stared into Maggie's eyes and said, "Maggie, you know, I'm not stupid either." Maggie Gaskell, a third-year girl with golden red hair. Her facial features were delicate, especially her eyes, which were as beautiful as rubies. Under Owen's gaze, Maggie snorted coldly. "If you're not stupid, why would you come up with such a bad idea?" Owen shrugged. "It's really bad. Jeffrey chose me to embarrass himself, not to put Dake Dimming in his place, but to put me in my place." Maggie. "Why did you do this even though you knew?" Owen. "I had no choice." "How about this, you go over later and just put the chocolate on the table. Then, you don't have to say anything and just leave. Leave the rest to me." Maggie picked up a chocolate gift box and couldn't help but growl. "This is the chocolate I made for you." Owen. "Don't worry, after I embarrass myself, I'll take it back and eat it." Maggie. "Get lost." Then, she threw the chocolate in Owen's face and turned to leave without looking back. Sigh. Owen couldn't help but put his hand into his curly hair and rub it hard. It was too difficult. Why did he have to suffer like this on Valentine's Day? He bent down to pick up the chocolate box that had rolled on the ground and lamented, "I don't know if the chocolate inside is broken." However, someone picked up the chocolate box first. "Senior, your chocolate." White Gouda handed the chocolate box to Owen and couldn't help but think to herself, "What a pity. How pitiful. He must have been rejected like me, right?" 3 in 1 6,000. Updated 20,000 words in 24 hours. Can't even be exchanged for a monthly vote? That can't be. T. It's the last day of 2020 and I'm still bitterly writing through the night. 10,000 at night. Chapter 309. Isn't this the hero's son? Owen took the box of chocolates and saw White's face. "Thank you." He smiled out of habit. White looked at his forced smile and said sadly, "You're welcome. Good luck, senior." Owen didn't quite understand, but he replied politely, "Yes, good luck to you too." White shook his fist and walked towards the lake with Luo boat. The snow outside was very cold. Just like his heart, it was cold. Mike Owen looked at White's back and murmured, "No matter what, this was a good encounter." Then he pulled himself together and walked towards Dake with the chocolates. Website. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. But after taking 2 steps, he was stunned. He picked up the chocolates and smiled bitterly. "Why would I bring them? It was half an hour before Mike Owen returned. He had just knocked on Maggie's door, but couldn't open it. He had to put the chocolates back in his dormitory. Without Maggie, without the chocolates, even the terrible idea was gone. Owen had to come up with a new idea. He strolled slowly in the snow, deep in thought. Aristocrat's house, room 501. The president of the Aristocrats History Research Society, Angus Jeffrey, looked out the window for a while, but Owen still didn't make a move. He couldn't help but take a sip of tea, feeling a little annoyed. Just as Mike Owen said, he didn't really want to get back at Dake. In fact, after the newcomers' competition, he gave up on the idea of recruiting Dake. Originally, his purpose of recruiting Dake Dimeng was to corrupt him, not because he valued him. From Jeffrey's point of view, because his father, Earl Jeffrey, was part of the Iron Prince's faction, he was destined to be at odds with Dake Dimeng. This was a whirlpool that couldn't be reversed. But Dake Dimeng's performance in the newcomers' competition was too terrifying. Combined with his reputation in the academy, one could easily come to a conclusion. This was a genius who was wise, talented, and diligent, completely inconsistent with the rumors of the past. To deal with this kind of person, corruption and influence were difficult to achieve. Although the conflict between the two sides had yet to manifest itself, with Dake Dimeng's promotion to the second year, the situation in the kingdom had become even more intense, and the relationship between the two sides was bound to be irreconcilable. What Jeffrey needed to do was to subtly influence the members of the Aristocratic History Research Society to be on the opposite side of Dake Dimeng without infuriating them. In other words, he was binding those members to his battle line. Stabilize the foundation. In fact, most of the members of the Aristocratic History Research Society were fence-sitters. No matter which side's voice was louder, they would follow suit. Therefore, he had to think of a way to prevent them from being affected by Dake Dimeng, which would in turn affect their parents and interfere with the situation. Jeffrey was worried sick. After a while, he drank the last drop of tea, then turned around and muttered, let's go and enjoy the snow." The large-scale movement of these few core members of the Aristocratic History Research Society was still very eye-catching. The snowy ground became more lively. And by the lake, under the guidance of Professor Li, Dake really built a snowman. They tacitly did not use magic, and only relied on the strength of their hands to push the snowballs. But building a snowman was actually a technical job, and it was a difficult problem to ensure that the snowballs would not scatter as they got bigger and bigger. And if the snowballs were too big, it would be very dangerous. So in the end, Professor Li still secretly cheated. Of course, if they did not use magic, they would not be able to stack a snowball with a diameter of more than 10 meters. When Professor Li waved his fingers to move a huge snowball onto an even bigger one, all the people outside the castle who were playing in the snow focused their attention on it. It was really too big. The students would always be subconsciously restrained when doing things in school. If such a big snowman fell, it would not be a joke. So it was already very exaggerated for everyone to make a snowman that was 4 or 5 meters tall at most. But they did not expect that there would be a fairy professor who was not restrained at all. Ha 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 ha. The fairy fluttered her wings and flew around the 2 snowballs that were successfully stacked, and her bell-like laughter was endless. She had not been so happy in a long time. The 2 huge snowballs were frozen in the center by her magic, and an icicle was used as the axis to connect the 2 snowballs. This made them so big that they would not fall. After being happy for a while, Professor Li quickly flew down and shouted to Dake and the others, "Quick! Eyes, nose, arms, and hat, get them up." Ha ha. But Dake just stood there and laughed dryly. After looking at the 2 huge snowballs stacked, he suddenly realized that there were no eyes, nose, arms, or hat that could match. "What should we do, Dake? It's too big." Deanna had already joined in. She stood beside Dake and looked up at the snowman. She was so happy that she could not close her mouth. Dake suddenly had an idea and said, "How about we draw it?" "Draw?" Professor Li tilted her head and thought for a while. She suddenly clapped and said, "Good idea." Thus, she refined a colorful substance on the spot and began to draw on the snowman. Slowly. It wasn't just the humans. The magic elves also gathered around Dark and the others. They squatted beside Dark and the others and looked up at Professor Lily drawing on the snowman's body. Her drawing skills were not very good, but the precision of her strokes was definitely full marks. As the completion rate increased, more and more people were attracted. Hundreds of students stood at a certain distance and watched the huge snowman gradually take shape. After today, this snowman would definitely leave a strong mark in their memory. In the crowd, White and Luo Boat stood side by side and unknowingly gathered together with the crowd. Luo Boat's eyes were completely focused on the snowman, but White's eyes could not help but look at Panduola, who was beside Dake. Pandora stood there and naturally revealed a bright smile. It was completely different from the way she looked when she was facing him. He clearly felt that he was disillusioned with Panduola, but when he suddenly saw that smile, he was in a daze again. The so-called love at first sight was mostly based on superficial knowledge of appearance. However, he had secretly liked her for half a year and was greatly disappointed at Christmas because of this. This experience and sacrifice was difficult to give up. He felt that he was better again. I still like her. It's normal for her to ignore me. After all, we're just strangers. She accepted the gift I gave her today. This is a start. At least the next time we meet, I won't be a passerby. White reached out and pulled out Taboo Love from the secret compartment in his sleeve. He wanted to see how much Pandora's favorability towards him was. However, there were too many people and people in front of him. It was not very convenient. He restrained himself until Professor Li Li drew a circle on top of the snowman's head. Shang Molian's largest snowman was finally completed. She flew down with a satisfied expression and said proudly to Dake, "How is it? Am I great?" Dake could not help but sigh. Great. It was really great. This snowman was forcefully painted into a painted pottery. Clap, clap, clap. All of a sudden, the students around him started clapping. The applause gradually became thunderous. Professor Li Li smiled proudly and kept spinning in front of Dake. At this time, the sky was slightly dark and the sun had begun to move to the west. After playing for the whole afternoon, the students felt a little tired after enjoying themselves to the fullest. This huge painted snowman became the best farewell gift. After seeing it, many people left the snowfield in groups and returned to the castle to walk to the cafeteria. Dake and the others returned to the center of the paradise and sat down on the stone blocks. Among the snacks piled up on the table, the 3 boxes of chocolates had already been secretly put into Dake's bag. Since the chocolates were given by the 3 people, of course he did not want to lose them. When he returned, he would find time to open them and take a look. White stood there and watched the crowd gradually disperse. He picked up Taboo Love again. Now, he needed to give himself a goal. A tangible, quantifiable favorability would be a guide. Let's go back, White. Luo Boat glanced at Dake and the others and could not help but sigh for his close friend. However, White obviously did not want to go back. At this moment, the 2 of them suddenly noticed that there was a person not far away who was walking straight towards them. The person's curly hair looked familiar. White thought for a while and finally remembered that he was the pitiful person who had fallen out of love. He instinctively felt that something was going to happen. Therefore, he put away the Taboo Love that he had just picked up. Michael Owen braced himself and walked forward. He watched for a long time and thought for a long time, but in the end, he still could not find a better way to insert himself. But Angus Jeffrey had actually brought his men out. Under the gaze of the president, he could only bite the bullet and look for trouble. So much time had passed. Dake had not put away the magic guide fairies. In theory, there should not be much magic left. If it was someone else, they would have already exhausted their magic. However, Owen still felt that something was wrong. He looked at Professor Li Li and Panduola sitting next to Dake and tried to adjust his gaze to ignore them, pretending that they did not exist. After a while, he walked close to Dake. Then, as if he had encountered him by chance, he said in surprise, "Isn't this Dake Dimming? Do you still remember me?" Dake was teasing the garbage slime that had become active again. Hearing this, he couldn't help but turn his head to look. Owen's appearance was actually quite eye-catching. He had the standard blonde hair of a pure-blooded noble. The ends of his hair curled upwards, and his face shape was extremely recognizable. However, when paired with his equally large facial features, he could be considered handsome. Dake thought carefully and said in realization, "Isn't this Senior Owen?" "It's me." Owen let out a sigh of relief. Dake's good memory saved him some embarrassment. He deliberately sighed and said, "I really envy you. You're surrounded by beauties on Valentine's Day." Your senior, was just dumped by my girlfriend." This." Dake blinked, not knowing how to answer for a moment. White, who was walking over, heard this and thought that the senior was indeed heartbroken. Breaking up on Valentine's Day, how tragic. However, Owen immediately said, "It's fate that we met. Junior Dimming, can you comfort me? How did you come up with this illogical statement?" Dake was speechless. "How do you want me to comfort you, Senior?" Owen was overjoyed, but he still looked sad. "Let's duel. Only a duel can soothe my sorrow." Dake looked around and said hesitantly, "Senior, this isn't good. If I remember correctly, you're a third year?" Owen hurriedly said, "It's okay, Junior. It's just a duel. I'll go easy on you." Dake's mouth twitched. "I'm afraid that a third year like you will be beaten up by a first year in public. You'll die a social death." "Dake, accept it." Professor Lee blinked his big eyes and said as if he wanted to see the world in chaos. Pan Duola originally wanted to mock this third-year student, but Professor Lee took the initiative and shut his mouth. D. Anna and Luo C. also had different expressions. White and Luo Boat, who were not far away, suddenly looked at each other. They instinctively felt that this senior was causing trouble. Owen added something that no one believed. "If you can, please use a duel to wake me up." "Then I'll do as you wish." Dake stood up with a smile and asked, "Here?" Owen's heart settled, but his face was still sad. "Here it is, a street duel." A new word? Dake couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's a street duel?" Owen said, "A street duel is a duel without any rules other than the fact that the person can't fight. Some people like it because they can fight freely. It's one of the more common duels nowadays." "I see." Dake quickly understood. Without restrictions, fighting freely. "Isn't this the original duel?" Owen said sorrowfully, "Yes, in the beginning, it was a duel in the past. Just like my relationship, it has become a thing of the past." Dake comforted him, "Senior Owen, I'm sorry for your loss. I heard that breaking up is just a new beginning. The next breakup will be better and faster." "Owen, thank you." Dake stood up and said, "Then, Senior, let me get ready." Then, he put the excited magic elves into his magic card one by one. Then, he picked up the snacks and trash on the table. It was almost time. After helping this senior soothe his grief, it was almost time to eat. After all, there were classes at night. 2-in-1 4,100 words. There are less than 3 hours left until the end of 2020. There should be one more chapter after the new year. There are less than 3 hours left until the monthly vote expires. Please vote. Thank you to the brothers who have voted for me. Thank you to the brothers who have been following me. Happy New Year to everyone. See you after the new year. Hungry. Chapter 310. Have you heard? Owen, a third-year student, is going to duel with Dim Eng, a first-year student. Of course, why else would I be standing here? Brian Wright looked at his classmate with disdain. He always felt that this classmate had been talking nonsense ever since they met. The conversation between Michael Owen and Dake Dim Eng was not hidden from others. Those who passed by saw that the atmosphere was strange. Like White and Luo Boat, they subconsciously stopped to watch. Of course, they heard the whole thing. This spread from 1 to 10, 10 to 100, and soon, it spread to the ears of the students who were still outside the castle. Those who were not interested still minded their own business. Those who were interested slowly gathered around. A duel between a third-year student and a first-year student was quite rare. It was only seen a few times a year. Moreover, Michael Owen and Dake Dimming were both famous people in the noble house. Owen was actually one of the top students among the third-year students. Remember the website, Vipcanshu. VIP. He had also shone brightly in the duel arena. But he was going to duel with a first-year student. If the other party was not Dake Dimming, there would probably be some righteous people who would forcibly interfere. Ever since he defeated the second-year student, Elsie Kevin, in the newcomers competition, Dake Diming's reputation had risen another level. The students had long regarded his strength as equal to that of a third-year student. Therefore, in the eyes of some people, this duel was completely an equal contest between third-year students. What's more, Professor Li, who had just made a huge snowman, was present. In any case, it was not the students' turn to worry. At this time, they just had to treat this unruly street duel as a Valentine's Day celebration. Come on, the more the merrier. Angus Jeffrey stood together with the members of the club, his eyes flashing. It did not matter who won or lost this duel. In short, they had to set up the opposing side. It would be best if they were locked in a fierce fight, so that they could show their momentum. And in front of them, where their gazes intersected, Dake had just finished cleaning up the trash. He was a little regretful that he had collected the magic guide fairies too quickly. He had wanted to teach them how to pick up trash by themselves. After handing the garbage bag to Luo C, he clapped his hands and looked at Owen, who had been waiting for a while. He said, "Senior brother, did the long wait make you feel better?" Owen asked hesitantly, "What do you mean by that?" Dake said lightly, "After all, time can heal sorrow." Owen whispered, "But my life is only left with duels." Dake smiled. "That's right, Senior. Until now, I still don't know. Since there are no rules in a street duel, how do we determine the winner? The initial duel mode also had a magic orb." Owen explained, "Street duels are fought until the other party admits defeat." Dake asked curiously, "Didn't they say that the duelists themselves are not allowed to enter the arena?" A strange smile appeared on Owen's face. "Of course I can't fight, but I didn't say that I can't be attacked." Dake was startled for a moment before realization dawned on him. "I see, so this is a street duel." Owen added, "Of course, you have to be careful in the academy." Dake nodded, indicating that he understood. At the end of the day, street duels were an upgraded version of street fights. There were no rules, no referee. In order to win, one would do anything. On the surface, the duelists were not allowed to enter the arena, but since there were no rules and no referee, who would care? As long as it was not a public competition, the real essence of street duels was to target the duelists themselves. At that time, it was time for the equipment cards and armed cards to be used. I summon my fist in front of me, a normal punch. That was about it. Even sprinkling lime, splashing sulfuric acid, and so on could be used as a way to win. Of course, they were now in the academy, so the so-called street duels were naturally restricted. Dake patted the stone table beside him. His understanding of unscrupulous means was quite thorough. How about this stone table as the dividing line? Sure. Owen glanced at the two stone tables, feeling that he did not seem to have any impression of them before. There was actually such a good place to rest by the lake? He calmed down a little and reached for his card bag. He had a chance of winning this duel with Dake Dimming. In the previous newcomers competition, Dake Diming's card deck had been exposed a lot. In his opinion, Dake's core magic card was the special enhancement card, as well as the high IQ magic elfin. In a street duel with no rules, Dake, who had the special enhancement card, could enhance the second-tier magic elfin in a very short time. Although Dake's second-tier magic elfin were all 4-star, each of them could fight better than the other. Therefore, it was a very fatal mistake to treat them as ordinary 4-star magic elfins. However, that was the extent of it. Relying solely on the enhancement card series of the Magic Elfin had its limits in all aspects. As a top student in the 3rd grade, Owen's deck was very rich and comprehensive. He also had his own system to deal with street duels. Since it has started, then let me teach him a lesson today. Mike Owen's gaze turned sharp. Although he claimed that he was here to embarrass himself, no one really wanted to embarrass themselves. He wanted to win this duel. At the back of the crowd, Owen's lover, Maggie Gaskell, stood there quietly. She actually understood Owen's difficulties. However, understanding did not mean that she could tolerate it. However, after throwing the chocolate, she still had to care about what she should care about. Therefore, she came back here again. This duel gave her a very bad premonition. She really didn't want Owen to lose. Isn't that Senior Owen's girlfriend? In the nearby crowd, Luo Boat, who had nothing to do, suddenly noticed Maggie's presence when he looked around. He could not help but whisper to White. White turned around and glanced at her. She was a little puzzled. It's true. I thought it was Senior Owen who gave her chocolate and was rejected. Later, it sounded like they broke up. Why is she here to watch the duel? Luo Boat whispered. It's not that simple between a man and a woman. How can they get back together without breaking up? White was silent. So it was possible to get back together after breaking up. In that case, does Senior Owen deserve any sympathy? Suddenly, he seemed to think of something. He asked Luo Boat, wait, if Senior Owen wins this duel, will he be able to get back together with his girlfriend? Luo Boat touched his chin and thought for a while. Then he pretended to be mature and shook his head. I don't think so. Maybe if he loses, it'll be an opportunity for them to get back together. White, what do you mean? Luo Boat, listen to me carefully. White and Luo Boat were just talking on paper. Professor Li Li and Panduola were all focused on Dake. Professor Li Li simply thought it would be interesting. Pandora, on the other hand, felt that Dark's victory was a matter of course. Luo Si and Di Anna were slightly worried. Di Anna put the panda on top of her head and looked at the field. She didn't understand what the street duel was about. However, there was one thing that she understood, and that was that Dark had never come into contact with this duel before. As a beginner, he must know nothing about some of the routines. Therefore, it was easy to be taken advantage of. Therefore, although she trusted Dake, she still couldn't help but worry about him. Luo Si and Di Anna had almost the same idea. Both of them couldn't help but worry. Under everyone's gaze, Dake and Owen each stepped back. There were no rules for street duels. Naturally, there were no restrictions on the location. Distancing oneself was a habit of dueling. Both sides made a "okay" gesture to each other when they were about 10 meters away from the stone table in the middle. Under such circumstances, the duel on the street began. Dake reached his hand into the card bag. The magic dancing on his fingertips quickly moved around the side of the magic card. Magic long-distance conduction and control came into effect. The magic card, as a carrier of magic power, could be completely controlled by that technique. Through magic, one could identify the type of magic card. Then, through magic long-distance conduction and control, it could be extracted. This was a basic technique that a qualified magus must have. Therefore, they only needed a trace of magic power to take out the magic card. Dake hadn't reached that level of proficiency yet. But after he reached his hand into the card bag, he immediately extracted the magic card accurately from the bag. Wrestling Hawkman. Then, he himself began to run without stopping. Even if he hadn't eaten pork, he would have seen a pig run. Since the street duel allowed one to attack the opponent, wouldn't standing still be waiting for death? Therefore, running first was the right choice. Almost as soon as he started, his usual summoning technique was already completed. The entire summoning time was only 2 seconds. In the blink of an eye, the magic card of Wrestling Hawkman lit up. Among all of Dake's magic elven cards, other than Meow Meow, which was not bound to paradise, only Wrestling Hawkman had the strongest mobility. In an unruly street duel, the importance of mobility was undeniable. Therefore, the half-hawkman who seemed to be wearing a wrestling mask jumped out from the magic card. On the other hand, Owen's summoning speed was obviously slower than Dake's. Although this 1-second delay was insignificant in this situation. But Owen's usual summoning technique was naturally compressed to the limit of 3 seconds. And Dake's summoning speed was faster than his, which meant that he had broken through the limit. The meaning behind this was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Among the people present, there were many who noticed this, but very few thought about it deeply. The battle between the two did not stop because of this 1-second difference. It was only for a moment. Dake's front foot had just left, and there was a patch of mud under his back foot. If he walked a little slower, he would sink into the mud. Even if he did not need to leave because he still had combat power, he would be imprisoned by the mud, which was equivalent to changing from a moving target to a fixed target. After that, a storm of attacks would follow closely and force him to retreat from the battlefield. One after the other, only 2 magic cards were needed. This was also because there were restrictions in the academy. Otherwise, if a magic card directly attacked the opponent, as long as it hit, the duel would immediately end. Owen definitely did not expect Dake to take precautions in advance. After summoning the mud spell, he could not help but be stunned for a moment. So when Dake began to summon for the second time, he was still holding the hanging sword that he had prepared beforehand in his hand. There was a moment of delay. The first magic elven to appear on the field, the wrestling hawkman, had already leaped halfway. Its claws landed on one of the stone tables, leaving a very deep scratch mark on the stone table. Then, with the help of the reaction force, it leaped again, almost instantly approaching. When Owen came back to his senses, he was still calm. He did not change the magic card, but directly summoned the hanging sword. With the completion of the usual summoning spell, a sudden gust of wind blew in mid-air, condensing into the shape of a sword in the air. Owen held the magic card and pointed with his finger, and the hanging sword fell from the top and stabbed into the ground fiercely. The hanging sword, that was supposed to be used to aim at the duelists, was now used to stop the wrestling hawkman's advance. Hatcha! The wrestling hawkman's flight path was suddenly blocked by the hanging sword, condensed by the gust of wind. It could not help but scream and come to a sudden stop. The feathers on its wings were affected by the wind and shook crazily, unable to fly smoothly. However, when the wrestling hawkman was stopped by the hanging sword, a petite grey shadow flashed past, forcibly bypassing the hanging sword from the other side and pouncing on Owen like the wind. It was another magic elven summoned earlier than the hanging sword, Meow Meow. As a 3-star magic elven with full magic attack, Meow Meow's speed was one of the fastest among all of Dake's magic elves. Although it was not registered by Paradise, with the wrestling hawkman attracting attention, Dake was already a little more relaxed. Everything that happened in the first few seconds of the battle was basically within his expectations. His third magic elven was going to be Little Fiend Beast. Together with Little Fiend Beast, Pride 3 had already appeared in his hands. Indeed, not having a powerful magic card was his disadvantage. However, the magic elven's sure-kill skill could effectively make up for the lack of magic cards. Once he summoned Little Fiend Beast, he would have the ultimate power to end this unruly duel. The entire duel happened in a flash. When Owen was controlling the hanging sword, he could not divert his attention to summon it. However, when he stretched out his finger, the hanging sword suddenly spun, pulled it out, and swung it horizontally. When this sword was swung out, it instantly formed an extremely domineering wind wall. It actually successfully blocked Meow Meow's advance. Seeing that the power of the hanging sword was actually so high, Dake could not help but frown slightly, and his fingers trembled. If the horned eagle man hadn't been fast enough to threaten Owen's life, the hanging sword would have been hanging above his head right now. However, after the hanging sword swung out that wind wall, its magic power was quickly exhausted, and only a thin shadow was left. Basically, it was equivalent to exhausting it. At the same time, a third magic card appeared in Owen's hand, and he began to run and move. The failure of the mud trap, and the forced defense of the hanging sword, caused him to be at a disadvantage now. Without their magic elven, to start, it meant that there was no shield in front of him that could block the other party. However, the summoning of the third magic card would solve this problem. Armed, transform. Owen pressed the third magic card hard against his chest. From his chest, rays of light burst out like a cocoon and surrounded his body, finally weaving into a full-body armor. The equipment card and the armed card were the real core of a street duel. Mike Owen put on the armor as he ran, and his whole body was covered from head to toe in soft metal armor. A pair of red compound eyes like an insect's appeared where his eyes should be, and there was a shining ruby in his heart that acted as the magic core. The moment he successfully put on the armor, a large amount of magic power was continuously absorbed by the armed card. Although Owen had become as light as a swallow and was no longer afraid of the 3-star magic elven's close-range attacks, the current situation was not what he wanted to achieve. His original intention was to end the battle in 2 moves. Only by taking the opponent by surprise, he did not have to worry about Dake using a move that he did not understand. However, it was too late now. When he armed and transformed, Dake had already successfully summoned the little devil beast, and Pride 3 was also in the midst of preparation. One of the effects of Paradise, summoning time of the elven magic elven belonging to Paradise -1. This allowed Dake's summoning speed to exceed the limit. Keek keek. The little devil beast's maniacal laughter resounded through the sky. It already knew who today's main character was in advance. The little devil beast would definitely stand above the sky. In the name of Dake Dimming, magic summoning. Amidst the little devil beast's maniacal laughter, Dake successfully activated Pride 3. On the surface of Pride 3, a brilliant light suddenly burst out. The little devil beast took the initiative to rush toward the ray of light. The skull pattern on its forehead quickly disappeared and was replaced by Pride's coat of arms. The dark golden light released from Pride 3 was instantly absorbed by the coat of arms and suddenly exploded. With Pride's coat of arms as the center, the little devil beast's body gradually turned into light and was wrapped in a dark golden ball of light. Roar! Accompanied by a ferocious roar, the ball of light was broken, and a pair of broken bat wings angrily rushed out. The demon with 2 sharp horns opened its scarlet and glowing eyes. In the dense light, there was an almost savage arrogance. It opened its arms and broke free from the ball of light, causing its muscular body wrapped in tight black clothes to be exposed to the eyes of countless people. This was a demon beast that Dake had never summoned in public. The purity and power of the darkness it emitted made people feel fear. Its head was covered by a mask, only revealing the pale skin around its mouth. Its chest was printed with a scarlet bat-like mark, and its waist was tied with multiple black belts. Below its knees, there were forearms that could stretch out freely and huge sharp claws of death. Every part of it was a symbol of extreme evil. If such an image appeared in front of the Holy Church, it would definitely be ostracized. But this was the Shang Molian Academy, a mage academy that had a more thorough view of light and darkness. He still summoned it. Owen, who was in armor transformation, turned around and saw the imposing demon beast, and his heart sank. A new second-tier magic elf meant a new sure-kill skill. If this was outside the academy, he would have trampled on it, relying on the power of armor transformation to personally attack the duelist. But in the academy, there were no rules in a street duel, and they were still bound by the rules. He could only use armor transformation to defend and dodge the opponent's attack. And he could not attack personally. Owen gritted his teeth and pulled out the 4th magic card. At this time, he not only had to face the threat of the demon beast, but also Meow Meow, who had bypassed the wind wall, and the Hawkman, who had flown back again. The strategy of not summoning the magic elf had made him suffer. But he had not reached the point where he was helpless. As a third-year student, his rich experience allowed him to still have cards to play at this time. Claws of Death. Dake's command resounded through the sky. The demon beast, who was immersed in the attention of tens of thousands of people, immediately came back to its senses. It stood on the spot, raised its hands, and aimed at Owen. Both of its arms suddenly stretched out and grabbed at Owen's body. Magic summoning. Owen completed the summoning of the fourth magic card at the critical moment. The light released from the magic card appeared in the air. Kaboom! A huge bronze door fell heavily, blocking the demon beast's claws of death. Then, the second bronze door fell with a loud bang, blocking the attack of Meow Meow and the Hawkman. Kaboom! The final third bronze door formed a tight triangle with the previous two bronze doors, protecting Owen within. Owen leaned against one of the bronze doors, panting slightly. The moment before the triple bronze doors closed, he saw that the audience was still immersed in some kind of shock. Obviously, it could not be caused by his armor card and the triple bronze doors, so it could only be caused by Dake's demon beast. The demon beast gave off a terrifying feeling, and it did not feel like a second-tier magic elf at all. If it was a normal duel, he would not have a good way to deal with this magic elf other than summoning a magic elf of a higher star level. But this was a street duel. The outcome of a street duel depended on the duelist's life and death. No matter what kind of magic elf the opponent summoned, as long as a dagger was placed on the opponent's neck, he would win. Owen sighed slightly. He didn't want to use that magic card at first. To be able to become the top student among the third-year students, Owen naturally had his own trump card. The reason why he did not use it immediately was that the summoning of this magic card required some time. Now that he had the triple bronze doors to protect him, he had the luxury of time. As long as he successfully summoned this trump card, he could instantly turn the situation around. Teleport. However, just as he was about to start the summoning, Dake's clear voice came from behind his ear. Then, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of him. He almost instinctively rolled and jumped. His whole body was as agile as a monkey with the help of the enhancement of his armor card. He actually successfully dodged the demon beast's choke. As for the demonic beast that had silently appeared behind the three bronze doors, it only revealed a cruel smile. It flew in mid-air, looking down at Owen as if it was looking at a rabbit with nowhere to run. Yes, there was nowhere to run. Owen's triple bronze door was like a cage, trapping him inside. The only opening was in the sky. However, the moment the three bronze doors were completely closed, an invisible barrier had already been created. Owen originally thought that Dake would need to spend some time to break open the bronze doors. He did not expect that Dake did not even try to break open the bronze doors. That pitch-black demon actually had a sure kill skill of the spatial teleportation type. It directly teleported in, "Senior Owen, surrender. You'll lose half the battle if you surrender." Dake's voice passed through the bronze doors and into Owen's ears again. Owen held his trump card tightly and finally put it back into the card bag. However, this did not mean that he had given up. If this was a real street duel, I would probably be torn to pieces, right? Looking at the pitch-black demon that was looking at him mockingly, Owen could not help but smile bitterly. However, he immediately put on a serious expression. The duel was not over yet. For a street duel, every element had to be used. He was now trapped behind the triple bronze doors. Unless he took the initiative to cancel the summoning, he would be a turtle in a jar and would be at the mercy of the demon beast. However, once he cancelled the summoning, he would have to face Dake and more magic elves. The situation would only be worse. Moreover, there was a huge advantage to continuing to stay behind the triple bronze doors. That was, the people outside could not see him. And that pitch-black demon couldn't really kill him. This meant that the duel was not over yet. Although it looked shameless, this was a street duel. Using everything that could be used. Before winning. By hook or by crook. Owen made a prompt decision. He gave up on the trump card that required a long time to summon and store energy. He also gave up the arrogance of teaching Dake a lesson at the beginning. He took out his magic elven card and started a battle between a magus and a magic elven in the narrow triangular domain with only one demon beast. Dake, who was outside the triple bronze door, did not let down his guard. When he did not get Owen's response, he summoned the mid-level magic elves in paradise, one by one. Except for the 3 4-star magic elves, he left them for the last summon. In just half a minute, He summoned all the other 5 first-tier magic elves other than the little demon beast and the wrestling hawkman at an unbelievable speed. With the appearance of each magic elven, the effect of paradise increased by 1 level. Magic attack and defense increased by 100. 7 of them added up to a total of 700. Therefore, in just half a minute, the demon beast behind the triple bronze door was a real monster with 2,700 magic attack and defense. Single target physical sure kill skill, Claw of Death. Long range magic sure kill skill, Razor Wings. AoE physical sure kill skill, Claw of 10,000 Deaths. Displacement skill, instant teleportation, with a cooldown of only 15 seconds. Demon beasts, forever gods. Ha ha ha. Inside the triple bronze door, the demon beast's wild laughter gradually changed. From the weird cackle of Mike Owen was breaking out in cold sweat. Before today, he probably would never have thought that he would be suppressed by a magic elven to such an extent. The narrow space inside the triple bronze door was the key factor that restrained his performance. Every summoned magic elven was killed by the demon beast in 1 blow. He was unable to use any of his sure kill skills. The sure kill skill of turning corpses into sacrifices was also easily seen through by it and destroyed. He wanted to use fast attack magic cards to bombard it, but in front of its 2,700 defense, it was not painful at all. He wanted to set up a trap to lure it, but instead, he was caught and thrown into the trap he had set up. If not for the fact that his armor was strong enough, he would have been the first mage to be killed by his own trap. After being caught and thrown down for the second time, Owen, who was battered and exhausted, finally realized his blind spot. It was not that the demon beast could not deal with him, but it deliberately did not. With such a high IQ magic elven, it was impossible for it not to know how to restrict movement other than killing. Whether it was tying his hands and feet, confiscating his card bag, or gagging his mouth, they were all effective methods. Once he was treated like this, he would have no choice but to submit no matter how shameless he was. But the demon beast had no intention of doing so. It was playing, enjoying the process of fighting a battle of wits and courage with a mage. Damn it! But in reality, Mike Owen was wrong. The demon beast was not enjoying the process of fighting a battle of wits and courage with a mage. It was just enjoying the thrill of crushing a mage. Ever since it was born, the small demon beast had never been so refreshed. All the pent-up frustrations it had accumulated in the past seemed to have been vented in this process. Apart from not being able to speak and not being able to taunt to its heart's content, it was simply too perfect. The small demon beast felt proud from the bottom of its heart that it was able to accurately grasp such an opportunity and rely on its own wisdom to control it. When Owen finally could not help but remove the triple bronze door, it was already almost 10 minutes later. Dake had already summoned all the magic elves. It was so boring that it was almost time to stroke the cat. Only then did Mike Owen reappear. He did not dare to remove the armed card because his face under the soft metal armor was bruised and swollen. The demon beast that flew out behind him still had a look of dissatisfaction on its face. Apart from the 2 parties involved, no one knew what exactly happened behind the triple bronze door. People only knew that after Mike Owen came out, he hurriedly admitted defeat and left without looking back. He had to leave because his magic was on the verge of exhaustion. The armed card was really a magic drain. Once his magic was exhausted and his armed card was removed, his sorry state would be exposed. That would be another fatal blow to him. Senior, take care. Dake waved his hand enthusiastically to send him off. After the demon beast degenerated into a small demon beast, it hurriedly clung to his shoulder to take credit. Asterisk at O at asterisk. Ah. It had a premonition that its little red flower was going to explode again. It ended just like that? The onlookers who had been waiting outside for 10 minutes were all dumbfounded. Apart from the exciting battle at the beginning, they had been looking at the 3 bronze doors for almost the entire time. As for what exactly happened behind the bronze doors? How did Dake Dimming win? Why did Mike Owen admit defeat as soon as he came out? What kind of trick was hidden in this? It couldn't be a show, right? Actor number 1, Dake Dimming. Actor number 2, Mike Owen. Actor number 3, Demon Beast? But the duel had ended, and one of the parties involved had run away, so they could not continue to watch. Thus, those who left and those who dispersed. All kinds of speculations spread among the crowd. The main thing was that Owen and Dake did not show any hatred, which made people more and more confused. When they entered the castle, some people saw Maggie appear beside Owen. So the unreliable rumor of Owen asking for a duel collapsed. But no matter what other people thought or guessed, it did not affect Dake Dimming. Dake took back Paradise and let the magic elves line up. Under the lead of squad leader Deanna, they returned to the castle. This afternoon, Dake was prepared to finish what he started. So after he communicated with the halfling chefs, he brought all the magic elves into the cafeteria. That scene was simply too spectacular. Other than the little devil who often went in and out of the cafeteria, the other magic elves had never entered the cafeteria so openly. They occupied an entire corner of the cafeteria, using the cutlery provided by the halfling chefs. They ate all kinds of food and snacks, and let out satisfied cries from time to time. Gradually, it was not only Dake and the others who looked at them with gentle eyes. More and more girls came closer and looked at them quietly. One by one, they all turned into small round faces. 4 in 1 8650. A new year, a new month. Monthly votes, recommendation votes, blades. Go, 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 go. Chapter 3:11. On the other side of the cafeteria. Angus Jeffrey cut the syrup cake on his plate with great effort, his brows furrowed the entire time. He was in a very bad mood at the moment. Mike Owen did go to duel with Dake Dimming. Although the result of the duel wasn't particularly ideal, it was still within his acceptable range. But why did he have an indescribable strange feeling? It was as if everything he had done before was in vain. As a core member of the Aristocratic History Research Society, Mike Owen's actions should have been blamed on the Aristocratic History Research Society. This would create the impression that the Aristocratic History Research Society and Dake Dimming were opposing each other. But in reality... Memorize in 1 second https://m. Vipcanchu. VIP Jeffrey's mind recalled Dake's last words to Owen, "Senior, take care." He suddenly had the urge to vomit blood. Why did the duel just now seem like a friendly duel between a senior and a junior? Owen had even specially chosen the more dangerous street duel mode. But why was the final result like this? After a long while, Jeffrey finally came to a conclusion. The problem must be with Mike Owen. The darkness of dusk gradually spread from the horizon and flowed into the orange-red sunset. A thin layer of gauze covered the snow. While Dake was taking care of the magic elves, he was also eating at the same table with the girls. Senior Panduola was surprisingly reserved in front of so many people. She was clearly a big eater who loved to eat meat, but tonight she always stopped at a certain point. Professor Li was the complete opposite. She had been releasing her nature to her heart's content since she started in the snow. Deanna was much more restrained in front of the professor, but sometimes she still couldn't help but compete with her for desserts. Luo was as quiet as ever. However, she secretly noticed that Panduola's familiar seemed to have extra spirituality. They sat together. It didn't seem like a Valentine's Day dinner, but more like a family dinner. Professor Li and Deanna didn't have much of a reaction. However, Panduola and Luo seemed to enjoy the atmosphere of this family dinner very much. At 6:30 p.m., Panduola looked at the time and said, "It's getting late, I have to go. It's been a great day. Thank you all." "You're leaving so soon?" Professor Li said, "I want to continue tonight." Dake couldn't help but sigh. "Professor, we still have classes tonight." "Ha!" Professor Li was surprised. "Is that so?" Maybe my brain automatically blocked out this part of the memory. She couldn't help but reveal a regretful expression. She couldn't remember how long it had been since the last time she had experienced such happiness. The professors in the academy were too serious. None of them even dared to roll around in the snow. Then, Professor Li, I'll take my leave first. Goodbye, everyone. Panduola waved at Dake and left the cafeteria. Then, Dake and the others began to pack up. The magic elves put small forks, spoons, and other things on their plates and carried the plates directly to the kitchen. Dake cleaned up the table a little and went into the kitchen to thank the halfling chefs. Then, the whole family left the cafeteria. Although Professor Li's face was full of regret, he had to say goodbye to Dake and the others at the fork in the road to the professor's dormitory. In the end, only Dake's group of 3 was left. It's time for class again. Anna pouted and muttered. I'm quite interested in the astronomy class at night. Luo Si said with a smile. Then, the 2 of them played around in the spacious corridor. The dim yellow light slanted in from the windows of the castle. The 3 of them walked into the light and sank into the darkness, moving forward in the intertwining light and darkness. After entering the tower and returning to the dormitory, Dake suddenly found a few chocolates at his door. He bent down and picked up the chocolates one by one. He thought that it wasn't good to eat too much of these sweet things. But he still carried them through the door. Using the last bit of free time before class, Dake opened the chocolates one by one. Some of the chocolates had cards and letters with names written on them, but some were just plain chocolates, as if they were too embarrassed to leave their names. In general, the people who gave him chocolates were the same group of people, but there were a few more first-year students outside of the Noble Academy. He put away the cards, letters, and other things, and then put the chocolates to the side. Although he was embarrassed, he couldn't eat all the chocolates, so he could only let the magic elves share the burden. In the end, only the chocolates given by Professor Li, Panduola, and Luo Si were left. He thought about it and decided to keep it as a reserved program and open it at night. There were always some surprises in life. Sometimes they were encountered. Sometimes they needed to be created by themselves. Come here for a moment. Dake waved at little Ibu. Ibu, who had already put her little bag around her neck, jumped into his arms like a frog. Dake recalled a move from a certain anime and tried to put little Ibu on his shoulder. But little Ibu, who weighed 13 kilograms, was a bit heavy. In the end, Dake chose to hold it in his arms. At this time, Paradise had already been reopened in the dormitory. After the magic elves played crazily for an entire afternoon, they were all satisfied and lying in various places in the dormitory, lazily doing their own things. But the gazes that secretly glanced at little Ibu were mixed with all kinds of envy. Every Wednesday night, Ibu would go out with such envious gazes. This was probably one of the main reasons why she continued to like astronomy class. Now that Professor Mitya Bartholomew had already agreed to let Dake bring little Ibu into the class, he didn't need to put it in his card. The road from the Noble Academy's tower to the Spiral Clock Tower was a bit long, so Dake had to leave early. He met up with Luo Si and Anna in the common room and went to the classroom together. On the way to the Spiral Clock Tower, the voices of the first-year students gradually became softer and softer. Their minds gradually broke away from the atmosphere of Valentine's Day and gradually returned to the mentality of a scholar. Everything was quietly changing. When they climbed the long spiral staircase and arrived at the astronomy classroom on the top floor of the Spiral Clock Tower, the sound of panting replaced everything else. Apart from this flight of stairs that was called the Spiral Hell, there was nothing bad about astronomy class. It was inevitable that someone would be late for the 7:30 astronomy class tonight. But Professor Mitya, who was also late, seemed to lack the confidence to deduct points from them. The astronomy class on Valentine's Day began 3 minutes after the bell rang. As usual, Professor Mitya Bartholomew entered from the ceiling in a carriage. Tonight, she was wearing a very sensual witch outfit. The increasingly cold weather didn't seem to affect her at all. There wasn't even a snowflake on the pumpkin carriage. At night, snowflakes began to fall sporadically from the sky, exuding a faint aesthetic aura. Professor Mitya put away the carriage and put the pointed witch hat on the podium. She waved her thin wand and weaved a line of words in the air. I love you all hot suit. Then she smiled and said, Today is Valentine's Day, ladies and gentlemen, have you received chocolates from your sweetheart? The classroom was cold and silent. Although the first-year students seemed to be following the trend, the communication between people was, after all, shallow. In fact, there weren't many people who really received something on Valentine's Day. Professor Mitya naturally saw through this at a glance. She was just teasing him in a bad way. Looking at the deflated expressions on the faces of most of the students, she was able to derive pleasure from it. While everyone was distressed by this, Professor Mitya changed the topic to the most desired topic of the students. During last week's astronomy class, I already had a prophecy. This year's Valentine's Day will be a sign of heavy snow. Snow is a bountiful year. Today is a suitable day for confessions. Those who have the courage to send chocolates today will have a higher probability of receiving a response from White and Green Day. As she spoke, she glanced at Dake's face. Dake's mind was moved. He stroked Ibuzachan's soft fur. He wondered if Professor Mitya was hinting that he would respond to every chocolate giver on White and Green Day. Please. Valentine's Day isn't Christmas. Even if it was him, he wouldn't be that despicable. But when this was mentioned, Dake was actually a bit worried. He could ignore other people's Valentine's Day chocolates, but he couldn't ignore their chocolates. The promotion of righteous chocolates in this world was still in its early stages. The importance of Valentine's Day chocolates was still relatively high. Giving chocolates back on White and Green Day would more or less cause some changes in relationships. Dake hadn't considered this before, but now he had to. Under the blessing of the first snow of winter, tonight's divination will be even more effective. I believe some of the students have already heard that tonight, our topic is a must-have for Valentine's Day, love divination. Professor Mitya waved her magic wand and drew a red heart in the air. Then she turned around and wrote, Love divination, on the blackboard. After this line of words was written, the atmosphere in the classroom gradually turned pink. The atmosphere was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. No, it really turned pink. The students looked up and saw a huge magic array appear on the ceiling. The pink light released from the magic array illuminated everyone's face. The pink light flickered. The atmosphere gradually blurred. Professor Mitya knocked on the podium and said, The door of fate has been opened. The blessing of the goddess of love will guide us to the direction of love. Pick up your magic pens and inject your most sincere feelings into them. Then look at me and draw a magic array on the paper. She then turned around and drew an exquisite magic array on the blackboard with just one stroke. In the center of the magic array was a symbol that Dake was extremely familiar with. He only needed a glance to recognize that it was the astronomical symbol that symbolized the moon. When this symbol appeared, Dake, who was in the mood to entertain himself, immediately became serious. There was such a symbol in the bliss coat of arms. It seemed to represent the origin of bliss. Professor, what kind of magic array is this? Professor Mitya didn't seem to want to tell him the origin of the magic array. Dake couldn't help but raise his hand and ask. The corners of Professor Mitya's mouth curled up. You can call it the love magic array. I excavated it in the ancient moon shrine. It will guide people on a moonlit night. Every Valentine's Day night is when the effect is at its greatest. Dake asked again, May I ask, is the symbol in the center of the love magic array the symbol of the moon? Professor Mitya smiled and nodded. She then looked at the other students. Dake Dimeng is right. That is the star symbol that symbolizes the moon. Every star has a corresponding star symbol. I will explain this part clearly in the next class, but not today. She meant that this was beyond the scope of the class, so shut up and don't ask. Dake opened his mouth and sat down helplessly. However, the information revealed by Professor Mitya was enough to clear his doubts. The astronomical symbols of this world indeed had extraordinary power. They should be similar to the key to communicate with the stars, and they would frequently appear in the corresponding magic array. If he could deepen his understanding of this aspect, he might be able to find the research direction of the Great Sin Array. He gradually understood that after reaching the great sin array, the differences between the sins would increase. The originally unified array wouldn't be enough to support the creation of the great sin array. Perhaps each type of great sin pill needed to be refined into an independent formation. With this inspiration, he needed to spend more time accumulating the relevant knowledge. When he accumulated enough knowledge, success would follow naturally. Dake refocused his attention on the class. He spread out a piece of white paper on the table, took out a magic pen, and tried to inject sincere feelings into it. What was sincere feelings? It couldn't be friendship, right? That was the feeling of a lover. However, Dake didn't have a lover. If he had to find one, he admitted that he had a certain degree of affection for Panduola. However, before he injected sincere feelings, he turned his head and looked at little Ibu, who was sitting on the table. Ibu followed suit and spread out a piece of paper in front of it. However, it only had an ordinary pen in its hand. Dake wanted to give it a magic pen, but it had to know how to use it first. Don't force yourself to use the pen to draw. Think about the feeling of using a killing move. Try to guide your magic power to your fingertips. Ibu tilted its head. It was confused. Dake couldn't help but cover his head. Let's use the pen first. Then he picked up the magic pen and slowly recalled his encounter with Panduola. Feelings gradually welled up in his heart. Under the guidance of magic power, they were injected into the magic pen. He began to quickly draw according to the magic array on the blackboard. When the completion of the magic circle of love reached 70%, a silk thread hung down from the huge magic circle that was rotating slowly on the ceiling and connected with it. Magic power began to circulate. 2 in 1/4200. I took a break on New Year's Day. The weather has been changing and I've been coughing. Everyone, take care of your health. Try to work towards the goal of 8K a day this month. Although you may not be able to do it, row underscore. However, you have to set up a target first. Otherwise, where will you shoot after you raise your gun? Last but not least, I beg for monthly votes. Chapter 312. It was Valentine's Day night. The students' yearning for a beautiful relationship was at its peak. Therefore, when they held the pen, their feelings would naturally flow to the tip of the pen along with the magic power. The so-called sincere feelings were actually very broad. There was no need to have a partner. Even if it was just the thought of, "What do you want?" it was enough. But Professor Midia said such a sentence at this time, in this atmosphere, it would naturally cause some misunderstandings. The students would rack their brains to think about who they liked. So when Dake sketched the magic array, he found that he had unknowingly become the center of attention. If it was calculated according to the number of chocolates received today, this gaze was too much. But thinking about it carefully, this might just be a product of comparison. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. After all, Dake Dimming was a little son. Professor Midia Bartholomew observed the students' every move from the podium. Her gaze swept over some people from time to time. Finally, she walked to Eudora's side and tapped the table lightly. Pa! Eudora jumped down suddenly. When she looked up, she saw Professor Midia's snickering face. She couldn't help but open her mouth, and her white cheeks were covered with red clouds. Don't be fascinated, Professor Midia reminded. Eudora lowered her head and said, "Okay, teacher." Then she immediately began to sketch the magic array. Professor Midia then continued to walk forward. After walking to the last row, she touched little Ivan's head. Looking at the crooked magic array, she couldn't help but purse her lips. She held back her laughter, then looked at Dake, turned around lightly, and walked to the other side of the last row. White and Luo Boat were also sketching the magic array. Luo Boat thought for a long time, but there was only the shadow of the magic chess in his mind. White bit the pen shaft and thought of the peach. After the two saw the professor coming over, they quickly stopped the illusion, picked up the pen, and began to sketch. Very naturally, Midya stayed beside them for a while. Then she returned to the podium. The students dilly-dallied, but in the end, they all picked up their pens. In short, regardless of whether the feelings were sincere or not, what should be drawn had to be drawn. As the magic arrays of love were completed, pink threads fell from the huge magic array that was rotating slowly on the ceiling, covering the entire classroom like a curtain of rain. The students curiously reached out to touch it. But when his fingers brushed past her, he didn't feel anything. Finally, someone could not help but raise his hand and ask. Professor Mitya smiled and explained, "It's a type of astrology. You can think of it as the night sky, and the magic arrays you write are the stars. When the stars merge into the night sky, it becomes a starry sky." The students nodded as if they understood. Professor Midya raised her wand and lightly tapped the magic array on the ceiling. The magic array began to spin even faster. Gradually, no one was able to see the circuit of the magic array from the diagram. When he looked up, he could only see a galaxy of stars spinning above his head. The threads that fell down gradually turned transparent and eventually turned into stars that adorned the starry sky vortex. The students couldn't help but hold their breaths when they saw this scene. Dake tried to use the magic array of love on the paper to sense it in reverse. But perhaps because he didn't have the gift of divination, he could only sense that there was magic power circulating in the starry sky vortex. He had no choice but to turn his gaze to little Ivan. But little Ivan was squatting on the table, using its two front paws to grab the paper with the crooked magic array drawn on it, but it was only looking at the starry sky above its head. Because it looked at the entire classroom, only its head didn't have any threads falling down. Dake couldn't bear to look anymore. He wanted to quickly teach the magic guide fairies how to sense and control magic power. At this moment, Professor Midya's voice sounded. The so-called love divination, in astrology, is concerned with the moon. With the moon as the center, you can see the mysteries of the movement of the stars. Then she closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was a silver moon shining in her eyes. With the help of the eyes of the stars, Professor Midya's astrology skills would be greatly improved. But of course, she couldn't do a real divination for a single class. Although there were many astrological techniques that couldn't be used to see the future, they were still very similar to that. Professor Midya was using one of them. In this astronomy class, she mainly wanted the students to have a deeper understanding of astrology. It would be best if they could personally experience it. Valentine's Day's love divination was a good opportunity to cut in. She would use the magic array of love to guide the magic power of the students, so that they could jointly drive a small group of astrologers. For now, it seemed, the students of Shang Malian Academy could be considered qualified in terms of magic power. Not a single one of them fell behind. As the starry sky vortex on the ceiling continued to rotate, some people were able to see something from it, while others were just confused. But it had to be said that the starry sky vortex was quite fascinating. It was impossible to get tired of looking at it. A few minutes later, the vortex gradually slowed down. Then, beams of starlight shot down from the starry sky vortex, accurately landing on the magic array of love, one after another. Professor Midya said, "Look carefully. If you are lucky enough, you will be able to see the other half of the future from this magic array." The atmosphere in the classroom suddenly became restless. This was the charm of divination. There was no one who didn't want to know their future in advance. Although sometimes, knowing the future wasn't a good thing. But at this moment, no one thought too much about it. Almost all the students focused their attention on the magic array of love that was illuminated by the starlight when Professor Midya announced it. Yee-yee-yee. Ibuken looked at the beams of starlight that were as enchanting as a dream. He desperately raised the paper in his hand to catch it. But unfortunately, the beam of starlight that was closest to him didn't change direction. Instead, it directly landed on Dake's magic array of love. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at the paper that had the magic array drawn on it. Dake was carefully observing the magic array of love that was illuminated by the starlight according to Professor Midya's guidance. The fog that gradually rose from the magic array was hazy. It seemed that some vague figures could really be seen from it. Dake thought for a while and suddenly felt that it was somewhat familiar. But he couldn't remember how he was familiar with it at the moment. He couldn't help but reveal a puzzled expression. As the astrology continued to operate, all the magic arrays on the students' desks started to rise with fog. The entire classroom seemed to be shrouded in fog. The students widened their eyes, trying to see something from the fog. Under their gaze, the fog gradually rolled, and there were many figures in it. Midya closed her eyes at this moment. Then, in the starry sky vortex on the ceiling, a silver moon hung upside down, full and clear. 2 eyes quietly opened behind the silver moon, overlooking the entire classroom. Every student's expression, every change in the magic array, the rolling of every cloud of fog, nothing could be hidden from her eyes. It's here. Among all the students, Eudora's divination talent was undoubtedly the highest. She held her hands over her heart and looked at the fog nervously. She prayed that the other half of the fog would point to the person in her heart. Stars lit up in her eyes, and the fog was disturbed by her thoughts. Gradually, the figure hidden deep in the fog emerged on the surface. Her eyes became brighter and brighter. Midya, who was on the podium, couldn't help but sigh. Eudora's longing was obvious, as if it was engraved on her face. But even without divination, she could see that the path in Eudora's heart was not easy to walk. What was waiting for her might be a future that was more severe than what she thought. However, everything seemed to be destined when the two sides met. Just like the fate that the astrologer believed in the most. Eudora was a born astrologer. She had a natural obsession with fate. While thinking, Midya didn't withdraw her gaze. Her eyes of stars could let her see what others couldn't. The fog in front of Eudora, as expected, showed the figure of the blonde youth. It was a handsome face that seemed to have walked out of a fairy tale. It was the prince that girls always imagined when they read picture books at night. Dake Dimming, the son of stars. Woo! Eudora suddenly covered her mouth. Her cheeks were visibly rosy, and her whole body was trembling with excitement. Although she had a general understanding of the foundation of astrology after learning from Midya and knew that the divination in front of her was not really predicting the future, she still felt sincerely happy about it. Dake's rejection had also confused her. The difficult math homework was also a blow to her, who wanted to be outstanding. The influence of her family environment made her not have much confidence in herself. Therefore, she needed to get some affirmation before she could go on with more determination. This time, the love divination was a perfect fit for this task. Eudora, what did you see? The girl at Eudora's desk couldn't help but ask curiously after seeing her excited reaction. From her perspective, although she could see the human figure emerging from the fog, she couldn't see the face of the human figure clearly. She could only know that Eudora did see her future partner. However, Eudora was immersed in happiness and couldn't hear the voices outside. Not long after, Saraswati, who also had the talent of divination, also saw the figure that appeared in the fog. She wasn't as excited as Eudora, but she just tapped the corner of her mouth in slight surprise. When Heidi, who was at the same table as her, asked, the corner of her mouth curled up, and she said proudly, "Take a guess." Heidi's face suddenly darkened, and she reached out to scratch her armpit. "You haven't become a prophet yet, and you've learned the bad habit of a prophet? Are you going to tell me or not?" Sarah's amber-like eyes flickered slightly, and she smiled. "How about this, when you see it too, let's talk about it together, okay?" "Then wait for me." Heidi immediately retracted her hand, rolled up her sleeves, and looked like she was going to go all out. She stared hard at the fog in front of her as if she was staring at the enemy who killed her father. Following closely behind, the fog in front of AI Ma Métis also reacted. She looked at the changes in the fog with a serious expression. As the figure in the fog gradually became clear, an unexpected person appeared in her field of vision. Susan and Lucy, who were beside her, came over at the same time, but they both looked lonely. Almost at the same time, Luosi also saw her other half in the fog. Her cheeks were slightly red, and her fingers involuntarily clenched. Midya, who was observing the entire classroom from a god's perspective, couldn't help but feel astonished at this moment. These talented girls had actually seen the same person in the fog. Is this good or bad? Dake Dimming, what kind of charm does he have to be able to attract so many outstanding girls at the age of 12? Professor Midya herself was an old leftover woman who had been single since her mother was born. She had never liked a boy since she was a student. Some people said that she was too arrogant, but she thought that it was fate that hadn't arrived yet. Once, she was annoyed by people's words, so she took the initiative to look for fate. She traveled on the battlefield as a prophet and came into contact with many heroes, including the great Magus Peter Sherwich and the brave Blake God. But she couldn't feel what attracted her from them. She gradually felt that perhaps she had set her sights too high. The current situation made her glance at the back of Dake's head, and then she sighed, "It's a pity that he's only 12 years old." No matter how hungry she was, it was impossible for her to see the charm of a 12-year-old boy. It was just that it was easy to be blinded by his charm. She glanced away and didn't dare to continue looking. After several students with divination talent succeeded, the rest of the students gradually saw the other half in the fog. Some were pleasantly surprised, and some were surprised. If they saw the people in the same classroom from the fog, then they couldn't help but turn their heads to look. As more and more people showed reactions, the atmosphere in the classroom gradually changed. Professor Midya, who was on the podium, couldn't help but open her eyes, but the eye on the ceiling didn't close. She observed the classroom with two visions at the same time, and she felt an unprecedented surprise in her heart. Because she was the only one who could see everyone's fog manifestation. It was indeed beyond her imagination. It even made her have the most direct feeling: astrology was wrong. At this time, Dake Dimming finally saw the person emerging from the rolling fog. During this process, he finally figured out where the familiar feeling came from. This saying of seeing the other half of the future from the fog reminded him of the love divination card that was popular last semester, which was also the flower card. It was also a love divination. It was also showing the other half. The truth of the flower card was to read minds through magic. What about the fog in front of him? When Dark recalled what Professor Mitya had said about injecting the most sincere feelings into the magic pen, he seemed to have understood something. Therefore, he felt that what he would see from the fog should be what he wanted to see, which was Senior Panduola. However, the person who really emerged from the fog wasn't the black-eyed Panduola, but a blonde boy? Dake Dimming saw himself. What the hell, my other half is myself. The legendary self-attack and self-retribution? Yee-yi. Little Ibu followed the atmosphere and called out twice. In fact, it couldn't see what Dake saw. Dake raised his head in shock, and then he suddenly noticed that he had become the focus of the entire classroom again. All the students, almost all the girls, were staring at him. And it was extremely obvious. The way the girls looked at him at this time was very different from the way they looked at him before. What's going on? Dake couldn't help but look at Professor Midya on the church. He had a faint feeling. What was happening in this classroom was definitely not a normal situation. Ah! Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pulled Dake back to reality. He turned around and saw that Luo Boat's face was deathly pale. The fog in front of him was rushing out like a tide and had already filled the entire table. What did he see? 2 in 1/4500. The monthly votes list is exploding, brothers, let's vote. Cough, it's been 2 days. I wanted to write 8,000 but I fell asleep. Fortunately, my biological clock woke me up and I made up for it. Chapter 313. Luo Boat's scream attracted the attention of everyone in the classroom. The dense fog that surged outwards like a tide shocked the students even more, causing their eyes to widen in shock. Luo Boat, white, and the students in front of them hurriedly retreated from their seats. The fog seemed to have gone out of control. Stop! Professor Midya shouted, and a beam of starlight as thick as a pillar shot down from the ceiling and froze the fog in place. The people around them patted their chests and gasped for breath. Luo Boat, what did you do? White whispered. How would I know? Luo Boat cried. White, what did you see? Luo boat, I saw. When he thought of that scene, his face turned pale again. Remember the URL. M. Vipkanshu. 6-inch Luo boat Broheim. Unknowingly, Professor Mitya had already come to his side and reached out to hold his shoulder. Luo boat stopped talking and looked up at her. Professor Mitya smiled and said, "There's a small problem. When the light shines, the stars surround the moon. The appearance of the second moon changed the trajectory of the stars and disrupted the operation of astrology. Therefore, what you see in your eyes right now is not what you think." Her words were clear, and her voice spread throughout the classroom, appearing equally in everyone's ears. There was a faint sense of trust. The students didn't understand, but they felt it was amazing. Emma Métis suddenly threw her hands up in the air. Professor Mitya reached out and said, "Speak." Emma then asked seriously, "So you're saying that the silhouette we see in the mist isn't the other half of the future?" "It wasn't originally." Professor Mitya smiled and said, "In astrology, every star emits a force of attraction. The higher the level of the star, the greater the attraction. When stars of the same level or higher appear in the same area, they will disturb each other and affect the operation of astrology. What you see is actually the second moon." "You mean?" AI Ma couldn't help but look at Dake. "So that's not why I saw him in the fog?" She opened her mouth and felt an inexplicable feeling in her heart. When AI Ma sat down, most of the girls seemed to have understood the core meaning of the vague explanation. Saraswati couldn't help but think, in other words, Dake Dim Eng is the second moon that Professor Mitya mentioned. But why is he the second moon? However, Professor Mitya herself didn't know. It was just an explanation that she came up with on the spot when she realized that all the girls had seen Doc through the fog. However, after listening to her explanation, Doc came to a sudden realization. "I see." He figured it out after thinking about it a little. This should be caused by bliss. The symbol of bliss was the moon. It mixed in with astrology, which was based on the moon, and it caused a disturbance to astrology. As a result, he unknowingly became the center of the entire astrology, forming a new trend of stars surrounding the moon. Because bliss had an outstanding effect on the opposite sex, most of the people affected were women. Of course, he could only see himself. Among the 7 sins, I have the deepest research on pride and bliss. Maybe this is the manifestation of the results. Thinking of this, he was a little happy. However, while Professor Mitya was explaining this reason, she didn't explain the abnormality on Luo Boat's side at all. From her actions just now, it could be seen that she deliberately prevented Luo Boat from saying what he saw. It could be seen that what Luo Boat saw should be caused by his own reasons. Dake thought for a bit and remembered that among the 9 stars that Professor Mitya personally pointed out, not only were there Sarah, AI Ma, Eudora, and Luo C, but there was also Luo Boat. Of course, there was also little Ivan. These 9 people were the people in the classroom who had shown their talent for divination. As for the others, they had yet to be discovered. I don't know which one Luo Boat triggered. It can't be the first divination, right? Dake suppressed his curiosity. This melon is ripe. Under Professor Mitya's intentional guidance, the students also assumed that Luo Boat's abnormality was caused by the appearance of the second moon. Even Robert calmed down after being skeptical for a while. When Victor quietly asked him again, he thought for a moment and tried to recreate what he had just seen on his homework using his memory. However, Professor Mitya said, "Listen carefully in class," and he quickly put down his pen. The astronomy class went on as usual. Although the students didn't see the other half of the future as they wished, Professor Mitya's teaching purpose was achieved. Therefore, she didn't do it again. Instead, she began to explain. No matter what, she could always attract the attention of the students with something interesting. Soon, most of the students temporarily put aside their previous regrets and devoted themselves to a new story. Until 9 o'clock in the evening. The astronomy class ended with the bell of the spiral clock tower. Because today's assignment was simple reading homework, the students were in a good mood. They chatted and laughed as they left the classroom one after another. However, Luo Boat Broheim was asked to stay by Professor Mitya. Luo Boat was asked to stay, and of course, White wouldn't leave. On the other side, Dake didn't have the slightest intention of leaving. Anna and Luo C also waited for a while. The last one to stay was Eudora, who asked Professor Midia for advice every time after class. But there were a total of 6 students, and each of them stayed for different reasons. The reason why Dake chose to stay was that he wanted to taste this melon, and on the other hand, he saw the shadow of the flower card from the love magic circle. After discovering the details of the flower card last semester, he had been trying to find a way to refine the flower card. For this reason, he actually went to Professor Ka-Zayer. However, Professor Ka-Zayer was not omnipotent. As for the former creator of the flower card, Mr. Starfish of the Marine Church, he had lost a large part of his memory after waking up. Mr. Hai Xing was the most brainwashed, and some sequelae were difficult to eliminate. Moreover, he was no longer in the school. After Dake failed in his search, although he felt regretful, he didn't take it too seriously. Because he had enough flower card reserves and the method to extract Great Sin, the research was also progressing smoothly. If it didn't work, he could still buy the flower card, circulating in the school. Now that the flower card craze had passed, flower card had also become a limited rare product. It was quite difficult to collect a set of different flower cards. However, as long as one was willing to pay the price, one could still collect it. But that was always a temporary solution. It was far better to master the production method of the flower card. Tonight, the Love Magic Circle reminded Dake of the flower card. He wanted to know the core principle of the Love Magic Circle, and then try to study the production method of the flower card. Midia looked at the 6 students left in the classroom, but she didn't mean to drive them away. She sat on the podium and tapped the table with her magic wand. Luo Boat walked up with his head lowered. Luo Boat. White hesitated a little and followed behind him. The rest of the people also gathered around with interest. Professor Midia glanced at them and said, "You can listen, but you can't leak it." Anna closed her mouth and patted her chest. The rest of the people also nodded slightly. Professor Midia looked at Luo Boat and said, "Broheim, tell us what you saw." Luo Boat tried hard to recall and said, "I saw a person. Red hair, pointed ears, face full of blood tattoos, mouth full of fangs, like a vampire." Vampire? White couldn't help but ask, "Luo Boat, why did you see a vampire? Was it Vlad?" But Vlad didn't have any blood tattoos on his face. Luo Boat still had a lingering fear. "No, it wasn't Vlad, it was a female vampire. When I saw her, she was leaning over, biting something I didn't know. I was stunned for a moment, then she suddenly looked up at me and her mouth was full of blood. I was scared out of my wits." White. Female vampire? Why did you see a female vampire? Luo Boat shook his head hard. "I don't know, I really don't know." Dark, who was beside him, was also confused. He had thought of many possibilities, but he did not expect Robert to see a female vampire that he was completely unfamiliar with. He couldn't help but ask, "Do you remember seeing someone who looked like that female vampire?" Luo Boat shook his head hard again. Professor Midia pondered for a moment and said, "It's strange. I thought you triggered the first divination, but it doesn't seem like it. You really haven't seen that female vampire?" Luo Boat couldn't stop shaking his head. Professor Midia hesitated and said, "Maybe. Have you read any novels about vampires recently or something that left a deep impression on you? I mean, what you think about during the day, you dream about it at night." Luo Boat opened his mouth and looked at Dake, as if asking for his opinion. Dake nodded slightly. Luo Boat said, "Recently, when I played magic chess with Dake, I was defeated by Vlad's chess piece." Midya immediately furrowed her brows and asked, "I wanted to ask you this before, but who exactly is this vampire Vlad? You all seem to know him? Aren't vampires extinct?" Eudora shook her head silently, but no one paid attention to her. Luo Boat wanted to explain immediately, but White pulled the corner of his shirt. Dake smiled and said, "Professor, this is a little secret between us." "Secret?" Midya said in relief. then there's no other way. So, Luoboat, can you describe the image of the female vampire you saw in detail? It's best if you can distinguish the obvious characteristics. For example, the style of blood patterns. Luoboat, let me think. He took out a pen and paper, touched his head, and tried to recall. Finally, he drew a strange symbol on the paper. Copyright. Then he said, most of the blood patterns are concentrated on the left side of the face. The middle part is similar to this pattern, and the color is very dark. Professor Midia carefully observed the rune. After a long while, she shook her head and said, I don't have much of an impression. Maybe you can go to the library and look for it yourself. Well, actually, this is not a big deal. Maybe it's just because you have a deep impression of vampires, and this time it's a divination for love, so you combined the two and saw such a female vampire. Then she raised her head and said to Dake, in short, Luoboat's matter ends here. Dimming, what do you want to say? Dake looked at the professor and said directly, it's like this, Professor. I want detailed information about a love magic array. Professor Midia was curious. Is there any additional use? Dake said, I want to make a card that can show the person I'm thinking of. Professor Midia was slightly startled. Then she smiled and said, I didn't expect you to see through it. The love magic array is not a secret. If you want, I can prepare a set of information. Next week, come and get it from me in class. She deliberately emphasized the word secret, hoping that Dake would be tactful. However, Dake pretended not to notice and said gratefully, Thank you, Professor. We'll go back first. Professor Midia took in a light breath. She could feel it. However, she had no reason to force the exchange student. She could only watch as Dake left with Deanna and Luoc. After that, Luoboat and White also thanked Professor Midia and quickly left the classroom. The two groups went down the spiral staircase, one in front and one behind. Dake, on the other hand, was carefully thinking about what Luoboat saw. He didn't think that it was really the product of combining the words female and vampire, as Professor Midia said. However, he couldn't find the slightest clue. However, he was just an outsider. If he really wanted to find out, he would have to rely on Luoboat himself. But the copyright symbol, where did he see it before? However, that was how memory worked. The more you wanted to remember something, the more you couldn't remember it. Dake asked casually, Do you have any impression of the symbol that Luoboat drew? He originally thought that he wouldn't get any answers, but he didn't expect Diana to look around and suddenly whisper with a shifty look, Sure, I know, Dake. Looking at Deanna's cautious and happy face, Dake couldn't help but want to pinch her little face. But he restrained himself and pinched Ibrahim's cheek. Since you're so careful, let's go back first. Deanna quickly nodded. Then, they quickly returned to the tower of the aristocrat house. Dake followed Deanna into her dormitory. She hurriedly climbed onto a stool and pulled down a book from the top shelf. Title, 300 Heroes, 2 in 1. Cough, it's been 3 days. F*CK, I'm finally done. Let's make some medicine and continue at night. Majimoto. Chapter 314. 300 Heroes. As the name suggested, it was a book of heroes that recorded more than 300 heroes. Deanna had always been interested in heroes, especially heroines. Therefore, when Professor Claire Kate and Professor Ryan Hux appeared in the academy one after another, she rummaged through the library and found such a book. This book had more than 600 pages, and every 2 pages recorded a hero during the war. Half a page was filled with portraits of each hero. She opened 300 heroes, and the hero at the top was Brett God. The second one was Valkyrie Yvette Saint Dimming. After that, Deanna quickly flipped through the book, and finally found the person she was looking for. When she took out this book of heroes, Dake had already guessed who it was. 1 second to remember. https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. When he looked again, he realized that Deanna had found a heroine. See, I told you. She has the same blood pattern on her face. Anna pointed at the portrait in the book and said excitedly. Dake and Luo leaned over at the same time. The three people's auras mixed slightly, and continued to ferment like grape wine. Dake read out the heroine's name, Blood Maiden. They didn't know who the author of 300 Heroes was, but his painting skills were really good. The Blood Maiden in the portrait was very lifelike, as if she was alive and about to walk out of the book. She was no doubt a woman full of charm. Her dark red hair was deep and seductive. Her excessively fair skin left a deep impression on others. Her deep eyes and high nose bridge, coupled with her petite but sensual lips and three-dimensional facial features, made her stand out from the paper. There were blood patterns on her face. However, it wasn't as complicated as Luo Boat had described. On her left cheek, there was a thin blood pattern that looked like a musical note that extended from the corner of her left eye to her jawbone. In the middle of the blood pattern, there was indeed a symbol that looked like a copyright. But in the written records, she was not a vampire. Moreover, her ears weren't pointy like the elves' ears, but ordinary round ears. There were no vampire-like fangs in the mouth in the painting. Of course, she couldn't be a vampire in the written record. Ophelia Bradley was the name of the Scarlet Blood concubine. She was able to obtain the title of Bloody Concubine because of her birth. Brad was the surname of a minority tribe. They called themselves the Fresh Blood Clan and worshipped the blood that supported all life. The talents in the tribe were born with the powerful and rare blood magic. Blood magic was a small branch within the vast system of magic. In short, it was magic that manipulated blood, extracting energy from blood. It could cause the blood in a person's body to go berserk from a distance. It directly broke out of his body, causing him to be pierced into a hornet's nest by the blood. He had even created terrifying blood fiends that fed on blood. In terms of blood magic, they were not inferior to another well-known blood magic user, the vampires. During the war, it was to deal with the elusive vampires. The Fresh Blood Clan provided a large amount of information about blood magic for the Alliance Army to carry out targeted defense and attack. For a period of time, the Fresh Blood Clan was very active. They used dark red cloaks to hide themselves. Only the occasional light could illuminate the blood patterns on their faces, making people feel horrified. But not to mention the other races, there were large and small strange tribes among the human race alone. The Fresh Blood Clan was just one of them. Although there were differences in tribal culture, they all had the same human blood flowing in their veins. In the face of a crisis that threatened the entire human race, every tribe was not afraid of sacrificing themselves in the war. Some tribes survived and became more and more prosperous. Some tribes disappeared forever, but their sacrifice was forever left on the title page of human history. The Fresh Blood Clan was one of the tribes that disappeared. As the saying goes, a tall tree attracts the wind. When they became a weapon against the vampires, they also became a thorn in the side of the vampires. It was recorded in the literature. In the middle of the war, the vampires suddenly launched a large-scale attack against the Fresh Blood Clan. The Fresh Blood Clan could not resist the terrifying attack of the vampires, who were the top of the devil race. They were destroyed. And Ophelia Bullard was spared because she had just entered the Shang Malian school at that time. But she lost all her family members since then. Even though she had such a cruel life experience. But Ophelia Bullard did not fall silent or fall. She was very gentle and kind, and had a very strong maternal instinct. But as a hero of the Golden Generation, she was very inconspicuous compared to the hero, the Valkyrie, and the others. So many people did not know of her existence. Even Anna, who had always been interested in the biography of heroes, only knew of such an unknown hero from the book 300 Heroes. And the reason for this phenomenon? It was not that Ophelia Bullard was not strong enough. It was because she disappeared not long after she stepped onto the battlefield. Ophelia Bullard was recorded in the book 300 Heroes as a sacrificed hero. Ophelia Bullard. After reading the short content of the 2 pages, Dake lightly breathed in, and then fiercely exhaled. "Every hero is great," Yizichin said. He sighed and straightened his back. Tomorrow, I'll find Luo Boat and ask him if the person he saw was her. Diana was very happy that she could be of use to them. She took out her collection of candies and drinks to entertain Dake, and shared with him what she liked and what she saw. Dake stayed in her dormitory for a while, and then returned to his own dormitory. The magic guide fairies were a little dissatisfied with him being late. They all chattered and asked little Ivan if anything interesting happened during class. Little Ivan finally revealed his most proud smile of the night. He patted his chest and gestured, telling them all the interesting things that happened during class tonight. Of course, only Fairy Ivan and the multiform fairies were listening carefully. The Delu beast, the little demon beasts, and the trash slimes were blocked outside by the language barrier. Dake sat down in front of the desk. He wanted to connect the dots between the events that had happened tonight. Assuming that the person Luo Boat saw wasn't a vampire, but the blood concubine Ophelia Bullard, then he should have come into contact with information related to this hero. This is much more reliable than the female plus vampire theory. But what if it wasn't the blood concubine? If the person he saw was a real vampire, then there's a big problem. I'm afraid that Professor Shi Erfu will have to examine him. Dake closed the notebook and silently breathed in. The air that entered his mouth was cold. Late at night. After taking a shower, Dake walked out of the bathroom with the damp and hot air. Finally, before the end of Valentine's Day, he remembered something that he still hadn't done tonight. In his hand, there were still 3 chocolate boxes that he needed to open. He had experienced too much today. After enjoying himself to the fullest, he also felt a little tired. But some things, even when he was tired, could still cheer him up. He picked one out of the 3 chocolate boxes. It was a flat square gift box. After opening it, the unique fragrance of chocolate assailed his nostrils. He looked at it. There were a total of 12 chocolates neatly arranged in the box. Each chocolate was round in the shape of a rabbit. Judging from the slight differences between the shapes, this should be a genuine handmade product. It must be Luo C's, right? Thinking of this, Dake found a small rectangular card on the side. There was only one word written on it, Luo C Flotty, 4. Dake smiled slightly. Meaningful things should always be stored away. Only in the future would he have something to remember. He put Luo C's card together with D. Anna's card. Then, he picked up one of the long chocolate boxes. He opened the box. Inside was a long chocolate that looked like a cigar. But after Dake carefully took a bite, he found that there was a mystery hidden in the chocolate. This is... Dake's gaze gradually became strange. He had seen cream and wine in chocolate before. But what the hell was with meat floss? Chocolate heart meat? Heart meat? Dake couldn't help but laugh. He was amused by his sudden inspiration. Then, he held the chocolate bar with meat floss in his mouth like a cigar and found a coin-sized card hidden inside. Only the name of Panduola was on the card. On the back, there was a vivid picture of a young pterosaur. There's only one left. Dake solemnly took little Lily's chocolate box. This was the last gift for Valentine's Day. He hoped it wasn't a trick. February 15th. The first day after Valentine's Day. The students walked into the classroom, chatting and laughing. But if you looked carefully, you would find that today, yesterday, and the day before were no different. At least, there were no new couples in the first-grade aristocratic and knight academies. It was as if they were eagerly anticipating the arrival of Valentine's Day, but in the end, they were just bystanders. But the final result wouldn't be out until March 14th, so it wasn't certain. But the students gathered together to discuss who gave who the chocolate was, and the final result was quite bleak. After chatting for a while, no one talked about it. It was as if no one remembered Valentine's Day after the first day. Instead, they talked about yesterday's heavy snow and the huge snowman that Professor Lily built. Even now, the enchanted snowman was still standing by the lakeside. It was said that a little fairy sneaked out of the castle late last night. Then, there were flashes of light at the snowman's location. In the morning, the snowman had been refined into a magic tool. It was really a stroke of genius that the students couldn't imagine. And the initiator of this matter was excitedly announcing the completion of the new teaching materials on the podium, but in fact, it wasn't completed. Only the part that Dake was responsible for was completed. But this didn't stop her from showing off to the students as if she had obtained a new toy. When it was finally bound into a book, she was going to do something big. In her words, she had painstakingly sold her beauty. How could she only show off the treasured teaching materials in front of the students? She had to promote it and let those old professors who always looked at her with colored glasses see who was the most dazzling Shang-Malian treasure. Professor Li, who was in a good mood, showed off his skills in the arithmetic class, making the little magisters suffer. After the arithmetic class ended, Dake waved at Luo Boat. "Are you looking for me?" Luo Boat walked over in confusion. This was the first time that Dake had taken the initiative to look for him. White hesitated for a while in her seat, but still followed him. Dake took out the 300 heroes that he had taken from Anna and turned to the page with the Blood Maiden. He pointed at her portrait and asked, "How is it, Luo Boat? Is this the female vampire you saw last night?" Before he even finished speaking, he already knew the answer. When Luo Boat saw the portrait of the Blood Maiden, his face was filled with fear, as if he had recalled the frightening scene he saw last night. He trembled and said, "Yes, it's her." "Dake, how did you find her?" Dake frowned and said, "Calm down, Luo Boat. This is the Blood Maiden, a hero from the same generation as the heroes. She is also a Shang-Malian student. Maybe we can find her in the student files. This female vampire is our senior?" White stepped forward and said in surprise. Dake glanced at him and pointed at the book. "She is a human of the Blood Tribe, a minority tribe. She is not a vampire." "Not a vampire." Luo Boat finally calmed down when he heard this. Dake wanted to nod, but he felt that something was wrong and hesitated. Luo Boat and White immediately looked down. The contents of the book were written clearly, and they soon heaved a sigh of relief. Luo Boat even laughed. "It's good that she's not a vampire. You don't know, but I had a nightmare last night. I dreamed that I was bitten by a vampire and turned into a blood slave. That's too scary." But while he laughed heartily, White's face turned pale. Clearly, he recalled the memory of being bitten by a vampire. At that time, he had almost been embraced. He couldn't help but say, "Don't worry, Luo Boat. I'm by your side. If anyone was bitten, it would be me who was bitten." After realizing that the person he saw was not a vampire, Luo Boat clearly relaxed a lot. He even had the leisure to ramble. Since this Blood Maiden is a hero of the Golden Generation, why didn't Principal Aertii mention her during his lectures? "I've never seen her before. How could I see her in the fog? Could it be that my divination talent is at work, and we will encounter her in the future? Thinking about it, I'm still looking forward to it. Perhaps she is fated to be my guide. Just like the relationship between Professor Mitya and Eudora." White said, "Hey, Luo Boat, you talk too much. 2 in 1. A day's work begins in the morning." Majimoto. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.